should. There we go. Right. Okay. It's gone red. So tonight or today, depending where you are, I'm with Hamsters, and we're going to chat a little bit of politics. We're going to chat a little bit about inequality, Zohran, Mamdani, and politics in general. How are you today, Hamsters?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
No problem.
So yeah, I guess we're kind of doing this because, you've been in a few of the servers that I'm in and talking about like inequality, talking about politics, socialism, and capitalism. And I'm not actually like entirely sure what your position is. I just have like a vague idea that you're like more on the lefty side,
Yeah,
more
a
on the
bit left
socialist
brained.
side. For me, I'm more of just like a neoliberal. I do like value free markets, but I'm like very socially left, so I'm not too sure how much contention will be there on like the like social side. Um,
Yeah. Well,
but
I mean, it's.
yeah, we
I'm sure
can.
there's plenty of overlap between the two of us. Sorry, I cut you off. Then you finish. Sorry.
Yeah. So I guess I we can just like flesh out our opinions. Like what do you take socialism to be? Like private workers owning the means of production, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that would be a good starting place. So,
Yeah.
a change from the capitalist organization of the economy, the use of resources for the profit of capitalists, the business interests of people who have a private stake in public, in involved lives and such. That
Right.
would be a general ballpark sort of
Yeah, I
way
agree.
of
I
thinking
agree. I
about it.
think I think private ownership over the means of production is probably a good starting definition. But I also think, you know what the Lockean proviso of property is? Like, instead of ownership property, it's first, like first user.
Enlighten me, go on, expand on that. So I just dropped
Yeah,
something.
no worries.
Keep talking.
Yeah, so the Lockean proviso is started by this guy named John Locke. He's like one of the classical liberals. And the idea is that basically whoever homesteads like a certain good or something like before it's used is now the owner of it. So, for example, if there's like an untouched like clay ravine and I start um, mixing my labor with it and start making like clay pots, then I would start owning those pots. And the idea is that this is like a really good way to divide up goods without actually, having some sort of overreaching, overbearing authority to enforce everything. Although, arguably you still do have to enforce this sort of Lockean proviso. So, for example, if there's just like a plot of land in the forest and I wanted to build a house, then maybe I could homestead this plot of land and then build a house there, and I would own that area. And the same thing holds for like capital goods for like factories and machinery. Like if I want to build a factory on a plot of land, I would also have to homestead it. So there's good historical evidence as well that this is kind of just like the way that people naturally go towards. I know I'm guessing you're gonna argue that this is just like a tiny piece of history and we're gonna move past it. So I'm kind of curious what you think about like private property rights.
Okay, so you're right. I will argue against some of that a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, I think that beyond just the idea of it being a portion of history, I think any action that's taken place in the social world is influenced by the environment that has produced it. So, in
Yeah.
our social world, for instance, we obviously both live in Western European country, Western
Sorry,
geopolitically the
what?
West, right? I'm in
Sorry.
Britain,
You
you're in
said what
America.
world? You said what world? Or
In our geopolitical world, so the
oh yeah.
West, right? Like, so
Yeah.
you're in America, I'm in the UK. They're both countries which have experienced various forms of capitalism and power structures, hierarchical power structures, societies
Yeah.
for significant portions of their history. So I think the idea that one would naturally trend towards a certain organization of society or management of resources is inevitably going to be infused with the ideas of the system. And so, whilst obviously there's reasons why people have acted a certain way, I think you can't separate that out from the social organization that has gone before that. For instance, if you've lived in England, then for the entire history of the country, you've had a king. There's always been a powerful figure at the top of society with significant resources and men at their command to enforce their view of society. And it's only very recently that power has been sequestered from the monarch to government, which itself was structured through wealth and finance for a very long time. It's a very short period of time that the right to vote in elections has actually existed in our societies. So when we turn back to what you were saying, even before we get into how resources are organized, there's clearly an influence of power and of class structure that goes into what we think we should do with our land before we even get to how do we turn the clay producing mine or area into more than just this. Hello, Shanna Cranky Pants. But yeah, I think I've a lot to say, but I'll let you respond to that first because
Yeah. So yeah, I agree. I agree that we're definitely shaped by our environment, but not like entirely. It's arguable how much that's going to be true. And I agree that we've kind of had this like new age of capitalism. It's kind of new relative to the broader history of things. So my justification for like the Lockean proviso or more like the capitalist private property ethic is just going to be through a utilitarian lens, just that a good way to promote well-being is to separate things based on first possession, first use rather than any other sort of like possession theory of property rights. And also capitalism just has like very good efficacy for promoting well-being, promoting growth, promoting uh, yeah, you're just nodding no because I know you're gonna disagree with this, but I think we can probably just go over some of the like capitalist modes of production points one by one. I guess we can start off like, are you a utilitarian? Are you an egalitarian? What kind of
I mean, again, I try to. It's a bit cliched, right? But like labels, I find are useful in a sense, but I like to think about action and agency and what happens in the material world. So egalitarianism would naturally be what I would sort of fall closer to. But yeah, I think that it is interesting to look at the actual sort of what is happening in the world and such. So like where you say efficacy and the sort of well-being of capitalist economies and such, I think
yeah
we often imagine the system as in the way Adam Smith might have done, right? Like someone who maybe was thinking of the individual professional, the candle maker, the butcher, someone with a direct connection to the sort of visceral elements of human society, some trade, and them being able to grow their actions, grow their enterprise, and become a success in their community. Turning their let's say they're a lumberjack, turning their little operation, cutting down a few trees, into something which produces wood for a community, and thinks about it beyond that. But I think Adam Smith, for one, I would not say he was a terrible writer. I don't think that he was a fool or anything. I think he had a lot of interesting things to say. But what he misses, I think, is the fabric of the social world which goes into the management of economy, and the fact that when we have resources and we start partitioning them into this is mine, this is his, this is the property of this conglomerate and such,
yeah
we ignore what that does firstly to people and land and what the relation to our world then becomes through this transformation. But also that, as we were just saying, our systems aren't divorced from the history that has produced it. They are continuations of power relations. So it isn't so much a case that capitalism is the true freedom of someone to expand their business and their enterprise, but the enabling of power structures to continue and maintain dominance over others. So if we look at the world today, for instance, it's not the case that the average person is connected to what they're doing and is able to expand their business. It's corporations dominant over the majority of people with resources to outgun pretty much anyone other than other corporations. Like if you, not only is there no, like it's just a lumberjack, right? The forests and land that you would want to start working is all privately owned by people billions ahead of you in terms of their worth, right? Their value on the market. And so
right
because that's also the case for all the other things you need to survive, so food, land, all the things that you would need to be able to survive as a person, said potential business-minded person is forced into the labour market. They must sell their labour to access these things. And inevitably, because of that, the vast majority of people will never be able to gain the wealth needed to be able to compete on this market, thus maintaining the power of people who had it all to begin with. And that's sort of why we see the people who were wealthy in the 17th, 18th, 19th century still having disproportionately, considerably more influence in government and such than, say, the average person living a working class life in Britain or America.
Okay, there's a lot of points to touch on. Hold on. Okay, so the first thing, sorry, my dog is here. So the first thing you said was, I mean, you didn't really explain exactly what the partition of land does. I think, there's pretty good reason to believe that the partition of land is good for well-being. It creates incentives for people to, earn goods and services. As for power structures, I do think socialist power structures are, a lot more dangerous than, these sort of corporations having somewhat of like power over you, because I don't actually think it's much power, considering that we have like a very strong government that enforces these private property rules. They enforce, like if ExxonMobil starts dumping a bunch of chemicals into the lake, then obviously we have liability and torts to sue them, and make them pay for this. At the same time, I don't think it's exploitation because you necessarily need to sell your labor, and I think that's less true in capitalist societies where we have like a strong welfare system to back you up. We have SNAP, we have Medicare, Medicaid. In Massachusetts, we have Mass Health. Um, we have a lot of these, protections to protect people from uh, dying from unemployment. So it's not like a work or die situation. And at the same time, like if it was the case that you had like this debilitating disease and you had to travel across town in order to, get the cure to it, I wouldn't say that the pharmaceutical company coerced you to grab the cure. And in fact, they gave you the solution. So that's kind of my view on jobs. And corporations give you jobs rather than coerce you into getting these things. And I think this work or die thing isn't exactly exclusive to capitalism. I think it's just something. Sorry, my dog keeps jumping on me. This is like a fact of reality. Um, and I haven't really seen any socialist models that really promote well-being as well as capitalism. But we can jump in to that as well. I'm not sure if you're like a market socialist or.
Okay, well, we can talk about socialism a little bit later. I think Mamdani is one of the things we've got planned coming up, right? So that would
Yeah.
come closer
Oh,
to that
sorry.
end of the conversation. But
Sorry,
no,
just one.
don't apologise. It was. So were you saying something then?
Yeah, I wanted to say one more thing. I forgot to
Yeah,
touch
go
on
for it.
the
Go for it.
so you said something about like social mobility, which is like moving income quintiles. You said uh like in the 1980s, the same people who had wealth or like were in the what was it exactly? You said the same
I said
politicians.
that in the 18th and the people who were extremely powerful and wealthy in the 18th and 19th century have largely maintained wealth through that, and that similarly, people's ability to access the same power that those on the top of society have is extremely unlikely. Most people won't make that
Yeah.
transition from poor to wealthy.
I mean, I don't think this seems like a descriptive dispute. So, I'm not entirely sure if that's true. Like, for example, if you look at the richest 500 families, barely any of them are still there. Like the Vanderbilts, whoever that oil guy was, I forget. And if you look at social mobility, I actually wrote a paper for my senior project in uni. Um, sorry, my dog keeps jumping on me. So it seems like even if you start at the bottom income quintile, which is like the bottom fifth of earners in the United States, you still over the long term, over like 20 years, you still have a 35% chance of reaching the. Oh, sorry, no, that's actually 26% chance of reaching the top income quintile. So social mobility is definitely like alive. And well, I do think people can become poor to rich. And I think the American dream is very much alive. There's another good survey they did at University of Michigan, which followed 10,000 people over a 7-year time span, and found that that 95% of people who started in the first income quintile actually moved up to a different income quintile after 9 years. So that I'm very inclined to believe that social mobility is alive and well. And I'm less inclined to believe that, wages are stagnated or people can't really get rich and, the American dream isn't really alive.
Okay, so a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I think if we start from the back and then walk backwards, so just on social mobility,
Yeah.
the fact the richest 500 families from, say, the 17th, 18th, 19th century, the old money, so to speak, the fact
Yeah.
that they aren't, say, the wealthiest family now doesn't change that they still have vastly more resources than the average person, and therefore in a capitalist organized society have more ability to exert their influence, right? Like if you are still able to command a place in the stock market and own property in numerous locales, then you're inevitably going to have an easier time navigating these markets than the working class person who has to, as we said earlier, have a 9 to 5 job to be able to afford food, rent, electricity, and so on. So I think that we're not necessarily focusing on who is number one on this list, but what is the overall shape of society, which inevitably favors people from certain backgrounds.
Is this, sorry, not to interrupt you, but is this a point of meritocracy that is like, some people are born in, vast bodies of wealth, other people are born very poor?
Well, it's part of that, but it's also sort of saying we're not in a society in which everyone has the Adam Smith vision of, well, we're gonna use our trade and all work together on we're gonna all use our position on the market to build a better society, because this society we're in is shaped by people with disproportionately more on this market. People are priced out of the market because to compete on it, you need to have had either a massive amount of wealth to begin with or the good fortune to get through the system and raise up. And even in the numbers you said, I mean, firstly, 26% chance, if that number is to be accepted, and that's still not, it's not great, is it? I mean, that's what, not only just 1 in 4. But then
Um,
secondly, it's not as though those people are moving up to the real powerhouse positions. They're moving a bit above their initial starting position. And I think that it also obfuscates a lot of the social processes too, because those people who've moved up are still, yeah, they're better off than when they started, but they're still having to be in a precarious position where they're not too far away from being unable to afford their rent and being unable to maintain a healthy, balanced diet and such. Like, it's a precarious
well,
life for a lot of people under our current system.
yeah, so to be clear, the 26% is going from the bottom income quintile to the top income quintile, which would be over six figures. Um, and then the 95% figure was from a University of Michigan study, following about 10,000 people over a 9-year time span, and that was moving up from the bottom income quintile. And I would say that, the topic of like food insecurity, is going to be less so, for anyone outside of the bottom income quintile. And last I checked, it was like 0.04% of people actually die from malnutrition in the United States. So I'm not entirely sure if that's going to be like a huge issue. And just keep in mind, starvation is going to be a subset of malnutrition, so it's going to be even smaller, a smaller number. So that kind of is, proof of efficacy of a capitalist mode of production, I'd
I
say.
mean, firstly, like, so even if we were to accept that number, like, I mean, 0.4% is still bad in a country that has a massive amount of resources to be able to feed everyone. Like, there's still people
Yeah,
dying in that
of
scenario.
malnutrition, to be
Firstly,
clear.
well, malnutrition is the obviously the extreme end, but people who are still suffering from poor nutritional health, which is quite a lot of Americans, that is still a significant problem of American society to look after its people, which in part comes from the fact that food is privately owned for the large part, is a commodity for capitalists to profit from, and so society that's people in society who say, yeah, actually, we should be addressing why millions of Americans can't eat healthily and why many of them go on to have severe health consequences. Because whilst obviously starvation is the extreme end, not eating healthily or properly or regularly has long-term effects on your overall health, which eventually lead to premature death and avoidable circumstances. Like, that is all part of the critique. But secondly, to go back to the idea of, social mobility and such, to an extent, there's something fundamentally which it misses, like focusing on the idea that, oh, we can move up and up and up and such. Why is the starting place bad to begin with? Why is it that people are born into less than opportune circumstances and have to move? And of those 10,000 people they surveyed, like, that doesn't lose the fact, that ignores the fact that actually there was some inequality or inequity or some problem that they were needing to elevate themselves out of to begin with, which is what is being targeted by anti-capitalist critique.
Right. So I guess the first thing to touch on there is, it's a 0.04%, or that might not be the exact number, but I guess you can search that up if you want. it's a very low number, and the kind of thing that we're talking about here is that there's not exactly going to be like a perfect solution where you completely eliminate all, harm, you eliminate all disutility. So I think the thing that we need to like make clear is that there's only going to be trade-offs and not solutions. For example, you were talking about how this like private mode of production is likely caused by this, causes this 0.004, or sorry, 0.04% of malnutrition. I would say that, a public mode of production, or like one where, you nationalize things or try to centrally plan things, historically has like a worse efficacy for creating food. So for example, in the USSR, they obviously centrally planned food. They nationalized a bunch of farmers, a lot of farms and plantations. And obviously there were kulaks, like people who wanted to oppose this kind of practice, and then that caused even more tension. So I think that these, if we're going to be talking about like internal contradictions or like warfares between like class and state, or maybe people and state, then I think that that's probably going to be a stronger move for like dialectics. If we're going to say that, like these people are suffering because of the private mode of production, I think there's a stronger case to be made that a public mode of production, or like one where the workers, quote unquote, own their means of production, would be more detrimental.
Okay, I mean, we'll come on to, like I said, we'll come on to that side of things a bit later. But I would say, just to touch on, I don't think there's any socialists that would point, or anyone really, that would point to the Soviet Union and say the workers had control of the means of production there.
Right.
But to think about, you say it's a small number. Yeah, we're in the West. We have massively improved upon the health and well-being of people for many reasons, but it's not zero, because for a person to be in their precarious, food insecure state, of which there are still, I mean, you say it's less than a percentage, right? It's less than 1%,
Yeah.
but it's
And
not zero. And those people, when they try and access food, must engage in an economic logic which excludes them because they don't have the necessary wealth to trade for the food good. If you want to, say, walk through a major urban area and say to the homeless people who are there, yeah, we're going to sort you out, you've got to engage in the capitalist logic of, yeah, we're going to exchange this money for this food. Otherwise, you're out of luck. You're reliant on the luck of maybe the charity in the city will help you out, which doesn't help everyone, right? And they can't get everyone. And that is what is being spoken about here. Something which lets people in the thousands starve every year, and as we said a second ago, the whole associated set of conditions which are linked to food insecurity and food related issues. Something which hinders all of that is the fact that food isn't managed as a human right. It's seen as a commodity, something for businesses to make profit of. And that is fundamentally something wrong with the system, because it leads to dire consequences for lots of people.
all right, so I don't think that's going to be necessarily a dire consequence. I think if you look at any like socialist mode of production in the past, I'm not sure if you do like any sort of apologetics for any socialist modes of production or any socialist states in the past, that they obviously had much worse conditions than the United States now. And I think there's some like conflating between intentions and outcomes. So, for example, even though we're in a for-profit mode of production and people work for their own self-interest, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're worse off. So there's kind of like the whole concept of the invisible hand, right? Like Adam Smith wrote about how everyone's self-interest would lead to the collective good. And then if not, then that would be considered a market failure. And I'm under the impression that most markets are not ones which have market failures. I think the coordination system in capitalism is much better when you let people do their own individual things. And with these like small sections of market failures, I do think that some government intervention might be permissible, but you should really look at it in a very like pragmatic sense, without.
But now, hang on a second though, because
Yeah.
I mean, again, we'll come on to socialism in a minute, but I would just stress, and I'll repeating this later, that there's no one's doing apologetics for these states. I don't think anyone's criticizing. I don't think anyone's defending, say, people starving in the Soviet Union or anything.
Well,
But
to,
describing them as socialist, I think, is misapplying the label, right? Because there's clearly not worker control of resources if it's like Stalin's state doing it, right? Like
well,
it's
to
not the case.
to be clear, we can pull up with like worker cooperatives as well, which also have a lot of empirical failings. We can pull up Yugoslavia, which did
But
cyber.
these aren't worker-owned societies, and they're also states, which
So
is another
do you
sort
think?
of critique. Like, but what we're sort of focusing on here is what we're living in the UK, in the US, where food is denied to people because it's privately owned, and
Um,
the consequence of that is dire because it means that many people can't access it. There's a barrier placed between a human right and what someone can access it with.
Right. So, I mean, I think that there's going to be barriers no matter what. The other barrier in like a socialist mode of production is actually coordinating the goods, and actually producing them to begin with. And I'm not actually sure. So, do you think there's like ever been a socialist country?
Well, no, but then we also wouldn't see it in that form, would we? Because one of the central critiques of capitalism is that it organizes itself into power structures like states. The reason socialists would oppose a state is because it is an organization of capital, a way of it saying, yes, we're going to protect the wealth of those on top. So in our
Um,
histories, like the wealthiest in society, the lords and barons and such, through the organization and mechanisms of a state. The breakdown of that is to say, well, we're not really divided by someone being British or American or French or whatever. We should all be working together as a planet to produce the best for everyone. And so you could say, okay, there's a homeless person on the street. Let's solve that by addressing their material needs. And that's quite an easy thing to do because if there's food in the shop now in a better system, with obviously many, many other changes as well, we could feed that person. Right now, if I were to walk into the city centre and try and take a homeless person into a shop, I need to provide money to the shop to be able to feed them. Otherwise, they're not interested. And that is a material failing of capitalism to address the needs of that person. And no matter how, like, we'll come on to some of the other stuff you said earlier in the sort of longer section, right? But no matter what, the fact that a person starves because they can't participate on the market is a really serious problem.
right. So, I wasn't really prepared to. I didn't realize you were like a sort of anti-state person as well. I don't think that's really consistent with a lot of socialist theory. For example, sorry, my dog keeps jumping on me. My Marx, in his critique to the Gotha program, right, on LaSalle, wrote about how the state could be instrumentally useful for, providing for those who aren't really in need, and that's kind of what we have in like a capitalist society as well. We have a state that's instrumentally useful for providing welfare to the people who are in need. For example, with SNAP programs, welfare, Medicaid, we have cash transfers. We have a lot of different programs that kind of help these people that are only there because of the wealth that the capitalist mode of production has generated. There's really good efficacy rates. Actually, sorry, I don't want to move on to social inverse capitalism. But I'll be stop. Um, so with people starving, I kind of just got to drive back the point again that we kind of face trade-offs, not solutions. So like when you try to say that we must eliminate hunger entirely, I do think that is somewhat idealist. But at the same time, we should try to eliminate hunger to the best of our ability. But we also shouldn't expect like some sort of utopia in which we just eliminate unemployment, we get full employment, we get like completely zero levels of starvation, no drug use. We get like everyone just extremely happy. I think we have to try to just
Well,
do our best rather than
of course we
providing a
should.
perfect solution.
Yeah, I mean, of course we should do our best, and of course, we're no one's saying we're going to click our fingers and like, everything will be perfect. But
Correct.
having ideals is good. It's good to aim higher than what we've got, and especially when the criticism isn't just like, oh, we must have everyone in perfect life, but actually addressing a really serious issue like people starving a stone's throw from a massive food market, say, is I think something which is solvable. If you said actually no, you can't own food as a profitable business venture, it's going to be something that's communally managed, then yeah, we absolutely would be eliminating hunger because it's something which could be done in our lifetimes.
Mm,
Now, I think that we move slightly forward in sort of obviously I'm not saying stop what we're talking about, but we're overlapping now with another central thing, right? Because you said a second ago that there are programs the state does to try and help people. Like, there's the mechanisms of our states are set up with some social conscience. And as you said, there's a welfare system, there are benefits programs, there are things in place to, a safety net to exist. And that is correct, right? There's people who have been inside state politics who have advocated for these things. We live in sort of social democracy to an extent, but these are still capitalist systems, and so these programs are constantly attacked by people who would rather use that money for business interests. The austerity programs that the West has seen over the last 40 years or so have devastated the actual effect of many of these programs. In my country, for instance, the actual ability to use the money you get from the government to afford a healthy, sustainable life has massively decreased. The access to things like universal, so we have the NHS in the UK, universal healthcare, but
Yeah.
it's been defunded. It doesn't have the same ability to support everyone that it did in the past. And so these can be traced directly back to political parties on the right, who are obviously the political wings of capital, the organization of politics for the interest of big corporations, using their wealth, their capital, to translate into political capital and say, we shouldn't pay as much tax, defund the welfare state, and let us make as much money as possible, basically, which then undermines the things which you said a second ago are used to make capitalism livable for people, which then has a material effect of people being unable to afford their rent, can't buy their healthy food and such, and ultimately adverse life effects for them, which is why, again, we would criticize the capitalist organization because of this consequence.
Right. So I feel like we're touching on a lot of topics, and then maybe we should zoom in on one. But I guess
Yeah, let's zoom in.
I'll address some of those first. So you said eliminating for-profit food would solve hunger, I guess. I think this is just going to the same, conflation issue where you think that intentions are conducive to like well-being. I think this is the same argument that Adam Smith made, in that individual actors pursuing their own self-interest would lead to a collective good. And that's kind of why I want, capitalism. I think we do have to go into like the socialism versus capitalism thing, because I'm not convinced that there's any mechanism in a socialist society which could coordinate resources efficiently. And by coordinate, I mean like so on like a supply and demand curve, I mean like reach equilibrium where supply equals demand. So the same thing with employment. A lot of economists go for goals like full employment. I don't know how or why like a socialist mode of production would coordinate such issues, because there's no really like coordination mechanism with a socialist mode of production. If it's centrally planned, then you're trying to, centralize all this dispersed information into one person or, a group of people. There's no real evidence that you can like calculate this out. And then you also touched on austerity, right? And so did you mention austerity in Latin America at all, or did you just mean austerity in the UK? Or
Well, the UK is obviously where I live, so I've got visceral experience of the effects
yeah,
of austerity. But anywhere it's been implemented,
I'm
the same things happen, right?
yeah, I'm not super familiar with like the history of austerity in the UK, but obviously I think austerity through spending cuts and static taxes would probably be beneficial just to lower the deficit. Because at some point, if your interest
Unless you're
payments,
poor.
um, I mean, I don't think
Unless you're
that's
poor and you rely on the programs being cut.
well, I mean, it depends what you cut spending on, obviously. I don't think it's necessarily means that you have to cut spending through like welfare programs. And also, there's good evidence that if you do cut some welfare programs to like a margin, then it does increase growth. Like, there's a lot of good stuff on Cato Institute, which focuses on like spending cuts instead of tax hikes. And then, for example, they cite Alsenia, that shows that austerity that's expenditure based tends to be less harmful to growth or even neutral. And then, Cato also argues that the spending cut plans exhaust their very mild recessionary effects within 2 years. And also, there's the argument through long-term fiscal risk. You don't really want to keep paying up these interest payments where the income that you're getting from the tax base is going to be less than the interest payments, because then you either have to default or just inflate away your debt. Two of the most dangerous things there kind of are.
Okay. The thing is, though, austerity programs, you said they don't have to cut welfare programs, but they inevitably do, because the people who orchestrate austerity, the people who implement them, have the interest of capital. They want businesses to be the people driving the economy, and so their wealth, their money, their profits are what are centered. The working people who rely on things like healthcare, public transport, school ability to function directly, like welfare payments and such, they aren't in the conversation, and so inevitably their programs get slashed, and that has been the case everywhere that austerity has been implemented, because it is a right-wing vision of society, isn't it? It's the organization of society as per market logics, not on social conscience. And so the inevitable consequence of this is that people are poorer, people don't have the same quality of life, they don't have the same access to the fabric of societal progress, right? Like if you can't have a decent education, access to good healthcare, the means to even get around where you live because public transport's been slashed, that decreases the quality of the society. And then long term actually does have a pretty negative impact on the economy because there's fewer people who can participate, there's fewer people who can be involved. And so austerity has to be implicated in our critique of capitalism because it isn't something which is going to have a benefit for people, the majority of people living in the society. You said something as well, which I thought was quite interesting. The idea that corporations can. I know it wasn't that side. What have I written down here? Can't read my handwriting. The individuals, people wanting to eliminate hunger. The direct action that you need to do, that on the ground right now, that has to happen for someone to not be hungry, is to give them food. And in any system, that would be the direct thing. Like, how can we stop someone feeling hungry? We feed them. Now, food is something which exists in society. It's something that is biological, right? It's something that contains the things we need for our body to function. And so, to an extent, the food itself being fed to someone is something which could be done. Right? Physically, you could go right now to a shop and take something out of the shop and give it to someone. But the problem is the way the food is managed. It isn't seen as food. It's seen as the product, the commodity of Walmart in your country, but something like Tesco or Asda in my country, right? And so this is what is being targeted. It should be the case that we don't see food as something which is privately owned as profit, as a profitable business venture, but as something which is organized and owned by everyone, that everyone is involved in. Now, as we both sort of said, we'll get onto the full sort of socialist element a bit later, but the reasons we can't easily feed everyone are because the corporation wants to keep it as its commodity. They want to see it as their means to making a profit. And that isn't necessarily some evil scheme. They aren't necessarily someone that is actively malicious and hateful of the quality of human life. It's someone who sees things through the logics of capitalism, the idea that they need to consistently produce profit to be able to be viable in the market. And so that is why we're so critical of this system, because it leads to people acting in this way towards things which matter critically to someone's life, and then inevitably produce the inequalities in quality of life, well-being, and then whether or not you'll starve in a society where it has lots of food.
Right. So I think you pointed out that how should we manage food, but I think my critique is more that how do we even create food to begin with? What is the incentive to create food? And that's obviously going to be like the profit incentive. Sorry, can you hear my dog?
I can, your dog. Yeah, I can hear your dog. Must be
Um,
quite an enthusiastic dog too, right?
yeah. So I think the main critique I'm running is just that how do we create food to begin with? What's the incentive to create food? And
Okay.
to manage food to begin with would mean it presupposes there's like this food supply to begin with. And I don't think this food supply can exist in surplus unless you have like an actual incentive to create it. And I think that
Well,
for-profit incentive is going to be necessary to actually get this like level of low malnutrition deaths and low level of starvation and
well, no,
high level of well-being.
I don't think I agree. I think that food is not a for-profit thing. It's a we need it to survive thing. And
Well, I agree with
if
that.
we fully utilized the massive advancements we've made in scientific knowledge, in agricultural knowledge since our early ancestors, we absolutely could feed everyone and absolutely could do it in a way far better. I mean, how much food right now goes to waste because it couldn't be sold in a shop, right? How much food is binned basically because it was sat in some shelf somewhere and they couldn't sell it even after they put it in the reduced sale or whatever, and then threw it away, whilst people run out of food in their cupboards and can't afford to get any more because they haven't been paid yet. Like,
Well, to
there's a massive area of thinking about how food currently is managed right now, how it's just hoarded by corporations trying to sell it for a profit, which could be rectified quite quickly under a system that wasn't operated on profit.
Well, sure, you could do like a one-time capital levy on the corporations, but then that would affect long-term production. So that's why when someone says, like a socialist tells me, why don't we just tax the rich? Why don't we just tax their wealth one time right now, and then redistribute it? Obviously, that's just going to have long-term effects on production. There's really good evidence of that. So, for example, like I'm not saying this is going to be your position or you're defending any of the USSR or socialist countries, but when you do like these one-time capital levies in these socialist countries or communist countries or whatever you want to call them, it lowers production very greatly, and that's when you see mass starvation. You see lowering of well-being. You see lowering of wages. And at the same time, I don't think that we can actually just create food and coordinate it properly under a socialist system. If you say you want to use all these new technologies, we can totally do that under a private mode of production. And also, corporations often mark down their foods before they get rid of them. So that's kind of like the efficient way of allocating resources. People who can bid up the prices on this are more likely to get like utility from them. For example, if you have like an old woman who wants to ride the bus, right? She has a higher willingness to pay than a 20-year-old kid who has a bike, right? Because she has a higher demand or higher willingness to pay for such a good or service. That's kind of why the capitalist mode of production coordinate things a lot more efficiently.
Well, hang on
And
a second though, because surely
yeah,
this is just moving pieces around the board, right? It's like shuffling. What's the saying? Shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic. The fact that the corporation can afford to drop the price when it's convenient to them suggests that like there's a clear um, excess of wealth that didn't necessarily need to be there for things to organize anyway, right? Secondly, it shouldn't be that way in the first place. Like, it shouldn't have to be that you have to wait for them to knock the price down so you can afford it. Like, it should be affordable anyway. It shouldn't be something that's tiered off. Um, and
awesome.
then to bounce back to because we're thinking about, oh well, this person could buy it this way and this person could do this, but they shouldn't have to. It should be something which, as a human right, is there in society for us to access. No.
Right. So to be clear, when you say human right, I don't really believe in human rights as being some sort of intrinsic thing. I think rights are just human fiction created to promote well-being. And necessarily, if you're going to say that something is a right, it confers another obligation on another person. For example, if you say healthcare is a right, that necessarily means that a doctor is obligated to treat you. It necessarily means like a nurse is obligated to treat you. So you're
What's
basically
a
just saying,
doctor doing if they're not treating people?
well, exactly.
Like,
You're saying that you're obligated. Other people are obligated to give their labor to you. And I
well, as
don't
a
think that.
society, we're all obligated to look after each other. Is how we should be thinking about things, right? Like, because I mean, when we're born, when we're babies, like can you imagine if people were like, yeah, I need to get some financial incentive out of this? Like, no, we grow into healthier human beings when people look out for you and when people treat you as
Right.
someone to be valued. And so then
So
when you reach the age where you're able to be viable and you're an adult and such, you can do the same for others. And then that's how we all progress as a society.
so that's kind of my point. So like, if you're obligated to do something, there's not really an incentive to do it. For example, doctors, they have very high medical costs. And if there's no profit incentive to like offset these things, then there's no incentive for them to go to medical school in the first place. And at the same
But
time,
many. So go ahead, sorry.
yeah, I was gonna say this is kind of tangent to the food thing, so I'm gonna just run it back to the food thing. Um, I haven't really heard like how you can coordinate food efficiently in a socialist mode of production. Are you advocating for central planning? Are you advocating for like cybernetics, social? Are you advocating for worker cooperatives, or like how would you coordinate this exactly?
Okay, so you a second ago said when you were criticizing the idea of some sort of retribution of sorts, like you sort of capital levy, you said, right?
Yeah, one-time
And you
capital levy.
said that it led to lower wages and lower production and such.
Yeah,
In those scenarios, the management of food was still private. It still wasn't democratic. It was still operated through people with a disproportionate amount of power over others. And so and even the idea that lower wages and such as a byproduct of that are things that we're critiquing, because we're not lifting the structure of capitalism into a new system where it just happens that there's someone else in charge. We're critiquing the whole thing, right? That there's a whole system in place that we're criticizing. And so at the moment, right now, a corporation can decide what it does with its food on a whim. It's profit based. Under a better
Yeah.
system where people are coordinating across networks and people are actively in communication and workers have democratic control of their um, of the resources that are in their control, there is a far better chance of that food reaching the people who need to access it and such. You imagine if the food that is in a shop is something which is managed democratically, that goes to people so that everyone's got enough stuff in their cupboards to be able to have a decent set of meals for that week or that few weeks or so. And actually, it would lead to a massive improvement in conditions, because how many the other sort of hidden side of capitalism in the West is the vast networks of workers treated atrociously by Western corporations and their sort of subsidiaries in said third world nations, global South nations, who are basically the most exploited workers, who are working for next to nothing, so that the corporations at our end of things in the West can make billions of them. If they were democratically involved in the production of food, then the networks across the globe could be massively improved, and the conditions in countries that don't have the luxury of saying, yeah, well, we've mostly eliminated hunger, would be resolved. It's all very well saying in the UK and US, well, we don't have that many people starving, but that isn't the case everywhere in the capitalist world. And so, to answer what you were saying, then the method in which resources were democratically controlled and organized through communication and such would massively improve things.
Oh, okay. So I like wholly disagree. I don't think there's any empirical evidence to back the notion that democratically owning the means of production or democratically coordinating resources actually leads to more efficient outcomes.
Is there empirical evidence for the other, for capitalists?
Yeah. There's empirical evidence. If you have like this lock-in proviso plus this capital mode of production, resources are allocated much more efficiently. For example, with worker cooperatives, worker cooperatives who are democratically own the means of production. What they do is they have like a sort of group meeting like every once in a while with internal reports, and they have extremely high time preferences, which means that they end up squandering resources or any residual income very quickly rather than using it for long-term investment.
They're still within a capitalist system, though, Hamsters, aren't they? They're not in the socialist world. They're still having to engage with the logics of capitalism.
So do you think that's the case because not every single firm is a worker cooperative, or like the entire world isn't socialist?
It's just the truth, isn't it? Like, it's not as though, like, in those scenarios, there's still many nodes of the network which are utterly capitalist, like even right down to where they are in their, where they're actually meeting, the energy that's going into it, the food they're eating. Like, they aren't in a socialist world. They're trying to act in a more left-wing manner, but within a right-wing world. The point of a socialist system is to say, well, we need to look at the whole system. We need to make sure there's no one suffering under the inequalities of the market. And so that's also why we're sort of not really accepting the idea that the Soviet Union, say, would be a model for rejecting socialism, because it wasn't socialist. It's a state within a capitalist world. So that's the point we're making.
To be clear, then that means, by your definition, it's completely unfalsifiable. There's no empirical evidence I could show you that actually disproves the efficacy of socialism or capitalism.
Well, in a sense, but then that's like saying, like, you imagine you're in feudal Britain in the 1400s, and if you said, oh, well, we need to organise society better, and then the Lord's like, well, you've got no evidence to say it would be better. Of course, because we've not lived in a system that is truly free of the problems, the problems of the market. But what we can point to, what we can see, is that the material needs of people can't be truly met whilst said resources that would help address those needs are held privately, because, as we're seeing every single year, millions of people can't access the things which are right in front of them because of the logics of the market. Which is why we've got to reorganize things, or why people advocate for a reorganization of our economies.
So I think even under feudal systems, you could probably find some evidence that is like if there was like a small sect of capitalist mode of production, then you could show that the efficacy or the rate of profit or any other metric or like well-being of these people are going to be much better. Capitalist like traditional capitalist firms have a much higher growth than like worker cooperative or any socialist mode of production.
Well,
So I
that's
do think
another point to intersect on, actually. So I'm sorry to cut you off,
no worries.
but
Yeah, I
the
do gotta let my dog out in a second though, because
that's all right. Just let me know when you need to do that, and
okay,
I'll
give me like two
respond to it.
minutes. Hold on.
Okay, then. We'll have a look at the chat. Hello, Raptor. I didn't see you there. Hello. And Fortuitous Ash says, when you let people do their own individual things within capitalism, they just steal from you. And that is quite correct. There's a. We can get onto the cultural elements of it, but there's not actually the freedom to act as a free agent, because unless you have the money to have your needs met and provided for you, you're engaging in logics which already exist. You're not able to truly truly experience the freedom to engage in the market. It's a faux freedom. And then Axel says Hamsters is cooking. Well, Axel, sorry I couldn't do more to win you over. I wouldn't quite say I agree, but each to their own. I suppose you must be on the more neoliberal side of things. And Easy Money says, I hear a British accent and assume 120 IQ minimum. Well, that is a very kind thing to say, but I'm a bit critical of the idea of IQ. So, I can't say I will shed a tear. But, I can't.
I just let my dog out in the back fence. But I was gonna say, I think we probably need to get more into like the granular economics, because we're talking about like socialism versus capitalism very broadly. And it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what your economic model would look like or how it would work.
Well, we've been trying to in this little bit. Like I was about to say about you said the capitalists. There would have been if they had implemented capitalist elements in the feudal system, there would have been improvements and such.
Yeah.
And I think that when we focus exclusively on things like growth and I don't know GDP and things like that, we miss the actual fabric of what these societies were like, because we did see a shift from feudalism to capitalism in the late 17th and 18th century. Late 18th and 19th century. The late 18th and 19th century. And conditions were atrocious. I mean, I don't know what you can imagine life would have been like in the industrial epicenter of cities, but it was terrible. Disease-ridden cities where the workers in those factories were basically treated as shabbily as they could by exploitative bosses, and things like cholera were rife. It was the intervention of people with a social conscience who said, actually, we need to do things to improve the conditions, who improved things. And many of these improvements were made either because they fought to have these things represented, or as a last minute intervention from governments who realised that they'd run out of workers if they all died. Say in London, for instance, where our public works came out because quite literally these places were just piling up with bodies, just awful places to live. And that's true of all the rights we enjoy now. They weren't like gifted to us because profits were up and growth happened. They were fought for, often against the capitalist system, by people who had to fight against massive injustice. Like there's a mountain of evidence and to suggest that our rights have not come through the good fortune of a progressive capitalist society, but because it took massive evidence. Massive worker movements. Go ahead. Sorry.
I disagree. I think there's like massive evidence to the contrary. I think there's massive evidence that a capitalist mode of production is what we can attribute to these rising standards of living, not these like regulations. I think that
no way.
Yeah, I think like if you think about it in game theory, right, the dominant strategy for each firm is to pay for a worker based on their marginal productivity. So for example, what I mean by marginal productivity is, right, when you add another worker, they necessarily add value to your firm. They create value for your firm. Whether or not you think, I'm not sure if you're like a Marxist, if you believe in labor theory of value, but whether or not you believe in that or not, the marginal productivity that they add to your firm is very real, and the wage that you have to pay them is going to be less than or equal to that marginal productivity. For example, there's really good. Hold on, let me pull up my notes. So there's really good evidence on privatization effects on economic performance, privatization effects on productivity. privatization effects on innovation, on workers, roads and highways, transportation, fire services, the water industry, science fields, telecoms, electricity, and I can pull the exact studies that I have.
I mean, you're welcome to read from them if you like, but the exact opposite is true. Having these things privately operated means that there's a disproportionate ability to have these things available for people in society, as we see in Western nations which have gone down this privatization route, where people can't access either the resource whatsoever, right, in the terms of healthcare and such, or different standards of it, where the places that have more available resources can outperform massively those that can't. But on the idea that the capitalist mode of production is something that helps productivity and such, and
Yeah.
that corporations and capitalists and bosses and such are seeing their workers as adding value. Well, we know. I mean, I'd say that we know that they see workers as a tool to greater growth and such, because the true horror of the system is felt in the environment that the profits are sought the most. So in places like on the east coast of China, say, in the special economic zones created to engender capitalist production, in places like Foxconn factories, where our computers and iPhones are made, these are hideous places in which the workers are surveilled constantly. They're working basically the entire time they're awake. Their productivity is massive, and the disproportion between their wealth, the measly wage they are paid to be able to eat at the end of the day and have a bed and such, versus the billionaires who have sailed off into the distance and into the influence of basically any government they like, is staggering. There's a huge difference there. So to argue, and this is replicated to varying magnitudes the world over. Even in the most progressive countries where conditions are largely improved, which I again attribute to the actual efforts of workers, not the capitalists themselves. Even in these countries, we're still seeing this massive wealth inequality, and that has effects on everything in the country, right down to the programs that you said help people getting slashed because capitalists would rather have more money as per the incentives of their system.
Okay, so to be clear, you touched on sweatshops, Foxconn, places in China like Shenzhen, um, uh, which have like very high economic freedom, and because each province is managed differently, right? So a lot of the places with more economic freedom actually have lower poverty. They have higher wealth. A Cato Institute article in 1998 found that 40% of countries with the least economic freedom have the highest levels of poverty, and then the 40% with the highest economic freedom have the lowest levels of poverty. Um,
Well, that
there's
is a
also
misleading stat, though, isn't it? Because the countries that have the higher rates of poverty and such are the ones at the bottom of the pile being exploited by Western nations, and a nation
I
like China, with 1 billion plus people, is going to like the idea that the workers in these factories are not living in poverty or not living in exploitative conditions is just absurd, isn't it? It's not the case.
Right, and so that's the point of big government. I don't think capitalism is when the government does stuff, and I don't think I didn't really get to talk about austerity much, but we can move on. We can talk about that later. There's empirical evidence that like capitalism improves health, and I don't think it's necessarily misleading because the index that they use is the economic freedom index, which works off the Lockean proviso. So whoever has like more private property rights, who has more free markets, who has less government spending out of national income. For example, Hong Kong in the 1950s had very low percentage of spending of national income. They had like 15%. The United States was about at 25%. And then another study by Johnson in 2017 finds that people in the most economically free nations live 16 years longer than those in the least economically free. Capitalism helps entrepreneurship, and innovation is something that people don't really pay for, but it benefits everyone. So it's
Well, hang on
positive
a
sum.
second. There's so much there. Surely you can see that there is a false attribution here of things like the progress of health and such and the well-being of someone to things which aren't the reason they've improved. Like someone's health in a Western nation being better than that of someone's health in a sub-Saharan African nation isn't because
Yeah.
the government says we'll let this business pay a bit less tax this year. It's because Western nations have benefited from centuries of colonial activities, the theft of resources and such from other nations to improve their conditions, which has then led to people being able to, or having an easier time organizing their nations in a way which then had a state ready to organize programs of healthcare and of education and such. The people in nations like like China, for instance, when we're talking about the special economic zones.
Yeah.
I can hear myself. Hold on a second. Can you
I
hear
do
me?
want to defend child labor as well, like sweatshops. I do have
You
some
want to
defense for that.
defend sweatshops?
Yes, I do. I do.
I mean, you're free to, but it's an interesting position to take because
Um,
they're one of the
well,
main cases against capitalism, right? They're horrific
no.
places that treat people shockingly for corporate
So,
profit.
um, sure. Well, not exactly, because a lot of these people who live in these areas where they have to work in a sweatshop because there's not really a lot of better jobs available are actually
Yeah.
like the highest of earners. So, like economics professor Ben Powell, who's like a labor economist, wrote a book called Out of Poverty. And so I see why, like prima facie, you think working in a sweatshop is going to be bad. But the whole book is just like arguing about how wages are determined by supply and demand is driven by productivity. So when you impose a minimum
But
wage or mandate sweatshops to take certain actions, it creates unemployment. And then also there's a case study in Bangladesh where they eliminated this type of sweatshop work, and literally children ended up going into sex work instead, and they ended up getting
that is
exploited by other people.
that is the exact. That's why we're saying capitalism has to be like a whole system of like criticism. It's not just like, oh, this one thing is bad. It's the whole web and networks. There's so much there which we can critique, right? Like the reason the sweatshop exists isn't because this is the best way to treat people. It's because it is the concentration of workers into a format which lets corporations profit from them, which produces horrendous conditions. Now, the fact that the work is hoovered up by them is another critique of capitalism. It shows that the dominant parties in society can shape the entire economy. There's no, as you just said, right? There's no other option no serious option for people to go and find work because all of the jobs and all of the wealth to afford the conditions of the society are held in the factories, hence the concentration of people there. And if
So
you're saying that people needed the sweatshop to avoid like going into horrific sexual labor and stuff,
yeah,
like that is making the argument for me. That's essentially saying the choices of the capitalist system are working in a horrible sweatshop or literally sex trafficking and sex
no,
labor and stuff. Like
because
that is how is that not?
those same options are available under socialism. In fact, it would probably be more enforced as you have higher spending of the government as part of GDP. For example, in Bangladesh, where
No
this
way.
case study I'm talking about is, they spend 36.7% of their operating budgets and 14.47% of their development budget allocations on the government, and the government is the one who is enforcing these terrible working conditions. So when you have like a liberal economy where corporations come in and offer jobs that are more beneficial than sex work, then this is something that contributes to industrialization and contributes to increasing productivity, increases to higher
Right.
level standards of living. So I think that the whole argument against sweatshops is kind of like a bit of a red herring, because what we want is to see these people lifted out of poverty. And the way to lift people out of poverty isn't to just like get rid of sweatshops because
But
they sound bad, or
no, but the
get
poverty
rid of
shouldn't
a
exist
capitalist.
in the first place, Hamsters. That's what we're saying. The poverty shouldn't exist. Let's talk about
Wait,
Bangladesh.
the what? The
Bangladesh
what
is
exists? The part.
the poverty shouldn't exist in the first. No one should have to be in a position where they're having to go to a sweatshop to work.
I think everyone
Would you
deserves.
be happy working in a
I think,
sweatshop?
of course not. I think everyone
Of
deserves a
course. I
yacht.
mean,
But do you see how that doesn't really, align? If I say everyone deserves a yacht, everyone deserves a mansion, you can't
it's
provide.
not about yachts and mansions, though. It's
Well,
about
no, no, no.
material needs.
So
Everyone should
the
be
the
able to eat.
the
And
analogy is that we live in a world of scarce resources, and to actually allocate these scarce resources efficiently means that we don't have an ideal where everyone just has everything all at once. So, like, if
but
I say
they
I think everyone
aren't.
deserves a yacht, it's very much impossible when resources are very scarce.
Okay, but they aren't scarce. Let's talk about. You brought up Bangladesh. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Bangladesh is a former British colony. It was massively exploited by the British Empire to funnel wealth from Bangladesh and surrounding countries, India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, to Britain. And so now Britain is one of the world's wealthiest countries with a massive economy, really strong, and it's got links everywhere and corporations
No, I
everywhere.
disagree. Very weak
Bangladesh
economy.
is, sorry?
Sorry. I was just making a joke. I was saying I don't think the UK is a very strong
Oh,
economy.
we've made some weird decisions. We're not. I wouldn't say we're
Yeah,
strong.
I was about
We're
to
obviously.
say.
I'm not saying that like you're not gonna find a nationalist like yeah go Britain from me. But
Yeah,
what I'm saying though is that Britain as a country has significantly more wealth than Bangladesh, and so the reason there are sweatshops in Bangladesh isn't because of the reason Bangladesh's government like you can't say oh well this is the government meddling. They are subject to the same colonialist mindset that their ancestors were. So Bangladesh is the host of many corporations outlets. So clothing companies have a lot in the West rely on cheap labor in Bangladesh to produce their clothes on the cheap. And so part of that cheapness is through the shocking lack of regulation and safety that their factories exist in, which is why many of them often collapse and you hear about these atrocities which happen because they haven't had the same resources to build a structured economy. And part of that is because to actually say to the world, okay, we're going to improve the health and well-being in countries like Bangladesh, would be to say, okay, we're going to have to take some of the wealth back from the British Empire, which stole it to begin with, and make these countries better. If you address the fact there is a massive inequality between a country like Britain and the former colonies it had, then you are acting against the capitalist system because you're intervening on the logics of the market. And so, which was built obviously through the colonial projects and such. So that is why there are sweatshops in Bangladesh, and that's also why when the sweatshops are removed, there aren't then proper alternatives to improve things. And I would stress as well that there's like also just that isn't the fact that the Bangladeshi citizens have precarious labor options like that isn't the defense of sweatshops. Like the fact that the sweatshop is the safest alternative is a damning indictment of capitalism. It isn't like something to be proud of. It's horrific.
no, I disagree. I think that the point is that under socialism you would regulate that away, and in socialism the children would just be in sex work instead. So a
It
synthetic
wouldn't
control
be
study,
like
they would
no
be because you
what.
said you wanted to regulate it away.
No, well, because we don't want like the whole point of a socialist system, workers of the world, right? So we don't want to be thinking, okay, well they're Bangladesh, so they can sort it out themselves, and we'll stay with all our British wealth. We want to say, okay, we've lived in a planet which has been massively influenced by colonialism, imperialism, power structures which are unjust, and we want to redistribute that wealth and have it fairly managed and organized.
Right.
And
So
you said about like yachts and stuff. It's not about yachts. It's about okay, there are billionaires all over Britain, and there's people working in sweatshops to make those billions. Let's change that. Let's have it so that everyone
n-
can have democratic say in their environments and
yeah,
resources.
so there's just not good evidence that democratically owning the means of production actually reduces in better results or higher standards of living or less starvation. And the point that I'm trying to drive is that when you get rid of these opportunities, which does seem a bit cynical to say considering you're working in a sweatshop, people do go into worse conditions. People do like synthetic control studies all the time showing that if you get rid of these opportunities, then people are worse off. And on
How
the
would
point,
anyone in Bangladesh be worse off if they had a fraction? If they had some of the, if Britain had to give back the wealth it had stolen from Bangladesh,
I don't.
if it had to give that back, you would not you'd be able to build similar structures to what we have in the UK
When
in terms of how our country is organized,
when
and
you
so
say, sorry, just to clarify, when you say stolen, do you mean that when there were a crown colony of the UK or Britain, they were forced to purchase like the public expenditures of Bangladesh were forced to purchase like British assets? Is that what you mean by stolen?
so the British Empire colonized Bangladesh, as with many
Yep.
properties around the world. Bangladesh, therefore, was commodified, right? Like the resources were property of Britain for British corporations to
That's
make a profit off. So the wealth from the UK, which we has put it on near the top of society of our global organisations and such, is stolen because it came from essentially forcing people in Bangladesh to um, to be the tools of the West and such. That is why they are a poorer nation, unable to properly organize its economy, and thus why working conditions there are not good for Bangladeshi workers. If you switch it the other way around, if it had been Bangladesh that had the empire and Britain that was a colony of it, it would be the other way around, right? Bangladesh would have the tools to develop as a nation, and Britain would be stuck in the mud. Would be having a very hard time organizing itself.
Hold on, sorry, I just spilled water on myself. I was going to say, I don't think that's true at all, because if you look at the case study of Hong Kong, Hong Kong actually became more rich than the Brits by like the 1990s. They were a crown colony of Britain for a while, and in the 1950s, a lot of people escaped Red China to go to Hong Kong, and they end up pursuing a very liberal and YIMBY policy. So, like I mentioned before, they only spent 10% of national income on.
Hong Kong has massive
Well,
Hong
because
Kong
they're
has
with
the
China right
same
now.
problems of
At-
wealth inequality, and it had it
No, they had one of the highest standards of living. They actually
and
surpassed Hong Kong.
The fact that Hong Kong, for one, is a bit smaller than Bangladesh, which was treated in a different manner in the sense of exploitation and such. Secondly, that doesn't contradict that Bangladesh was treated objectively. People living in countries like Bangladesh do not have the same experiences because Britain took the things there for itself, and the continuation of these colonial policies is felt through capitalism, where corporations can, as we said a second ago, put their primary labor, building up and such there, so factories, farms, on the cheap, knowing that there's not the same regulations to manage it in a way which would reduce their profits, and then make a fortune. I mean, what is the profit of corporations like Nike and Adidas and Gap and such compared to the wages of a Bangladeshi worker? If you address that wealth inequality, the precarious nature of working in a Bangladeshi sweatshop would no longer exist, and you could actually improve conditions there, which is why we advocate for not capitalism, not a capitalist system.
So, like I was talking about before, you keep saying regulations, but there's like a vast body of evidence that regulation in Bangladesh, which did materialize, caused more increases in poverty and increases in child labor through sex work, which is like abhorrent. So
how? Okay, what have they done to come to this conclusion? How
so
have they
do you know what
considered
do you know what a synthetic control study is? What they do is it's an econometric method where they pull like certain weights from like certain countries to like demonstrate like a counterfactual what would have happened versus not doing it. So what they demonstrated was what would happen if you implemented a regulation versus not implementing it. And I can actually link you the study in Discord right now.
Why don't you put it in the YouTube chat and we can
okay, we can go over this.
Because
someone said all those studies are highly biased in favor of Western capitalism, but that's not true because this is just
awesome person.
This is just an econometric study. So if you look at hold on, let me pull up my notes. If you look at table.
Why don't you put could you put like a link to the
Yep, I put in chat the SSRN table.
In the YouTube chat or
yeah. In the YouTube chat. I'll send it to you on Discord as well. So
is it in the YouTube? I can't see it on YouTube.
Yeah, I just send it to you on Discord as well. So what they did was, in table 5, they used 30.5% of Singapore, 28.8% of India, 17.9% of Armenia, 15.9% of Mongolia, and 7% of Indonesia. They use instruments to ensure that these variables aren't like just confounding variables, so they're not finding like some spurious correlation. And are you familiar with the Rana Plaza disaster?
I'm not, but I can imagine.
So there, like you might imagine, multinational brands started pulling the garment industry out, which funded child labor because of a disaster. It's somewhat like the Triangle Sweatshop fire. Are you familiar with that?
Triangle Sweatshop fire.
In the United States. So basically, the long story short is a bunch of workers died in the sweatshops.
Right.
So if you pull up, you have the paper up. Can you go to figure 2?
Figure 2. Let's have a look.
Yeah, just Control F.
Let's if I share my screen quickly, that might make it a bit easier for everyone to see what's happening here. Let's see. Share screen. Go there. Right, everyone. Can you see what's on my screen now? So we're going to.
I'm on my phone, so it's like very tiny.
I can zoom in.
Jesus Christ. I can't.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So we're looking at this.
Oh yeah, I can see it. No. Sorry. Scroll up. Actually, I think figure 1.
Okay. Figure 1. Where on This one here treated.
Yep.
Is this figure one here?
Yep. So you see where it says 2013? That's when garment factories started pulling out. They end up getting employed in black market labor places. And you see that dotted line?
Right. Yeah.
That would be employment had there been no regulations or had there been no garment pulling out. And
Okay.
I know. Are you familiar with like synthetic control studies or?
I've heard of them. I would like to know how this really changes, like how this contradicts or impacts on like what I've been saying to you,
Yeah.
because
So
the sweatshop, what like this paper isn't. I don't think a piece of evidence that says, well, sweatshops are good. It's surely the conclusion you would take from a paper like this, even before we get into some of the criticisms you might have of it. Because obviously I've not read it because I've only just seen it now. But
yeah, no, I don't
something
expect
that
you to read the whole thing
well,
instantly.
exactly right. But well, yeah, I'd be happy to at some point. But the point isn't that sweatshops are good. It's connecting Bangladesh's existence as a country to the wider
You can.
world. I'll just quickly
So
grab
actually,
it.
the paper concludes by saying, given the importance of the garment industry in Bangladesh's development in providing a pathway out of extreme poverty, our findings raise important questions about the efficacy of anti-sweatshop activism in improving worker welfare. So I think that's pretty
But that
akin.
doesn't that isn't saying that sweatshops are good. Or so that's saying
Of course it is.
sorry, no, it isn't. It's saying that the solution that has been proposed as things are currently is flawed. That should let you criticize the wider capitalist structure that is around it, right? Like that should make you think, okay, well,
Well, there's no.
if sorry.
Sorry, no, keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Like the sweatshop, no one, the paper I don't think is saying, oh well, sweatshops are that's the way to go. It's saying the current method in which Bangladesh's government have tried to address the lives of their workers has not worked. And then you, as a critical mind, being able to look at the history of Bangladesh, would say, okay, well, this is clearly a country that has been exploited by the colonial projects of Britain, but then after that, the vast wealth inequality of our global organization, the fact that Western corporations put their stuff in Bangladesh to exploit the bad labor conditions, and then the removing sweatshops has just made the wealth from capitalists in the West think, okay, well, we'll just go to some other deregulated country, and then the exploitative wealth practices have taken place. I
No,
think
what
that
they
this doesn't say anything about the
Okay, so to be clear, what these like garment industries did was they did go to other countries to exploit, quote unquote, exploit other people.
how
And
is it quote unquote they are exploiting them.
no, well, because it's a positive sum trade. This is like the whole situation
How
of.
is that?
Okay, so
How
to
is
be
working
clear,
in a sweatshop
wait
positive?
before we go into that, I just want to say that the paper definitely does support sweatshop
Child
because
labor.
child labor. It is child labor, but
So,
it I
wait,
okay, to be
like,
clear, but do you agree that the paper does support the notion of sweatshops being the pathway out of poverty? I mean, I can quote this. Given the importance of the garment industry in Bangladesh's development in providing a pathway out of extreme poverty.
given the importance of the garment industry, our finding raises important questions about the efficacy of anti-sweatshop activism. So this paper,
Yeah,
whilst from the looks of it, I'm probably not going to agree with a lot of it, but that to me suggests that it's criticizing the one implementation of like currently just opposing anti-sweatshop stuff, which
can
I think if you were to have a sensible opinion about it, would be saying, okay, we shouldn't just say, well, we're going to stop working here because, as you said, there's a vacuum then, and capitalists will move their stuff elsewhere. That should be a criticism of the whole society, of
no.
people, like the world. The fact that we've organized ourselves in a way that leads people in poorer countries to be just exploited and then dumped off to horrible other forms of labor when capitalists can't use them anymore. That should make us think, okay, well, let's actually build things in Bangladesh and in other global south countries to improve things. Like, how is this? How is
Well,
this at all? I mean, you said it yourself, child labor. Like, how can this be good?
you think child labor is categorically bad?
Yes.
Do you think if okay, so what if you have a trade-off between sex work and child labor, which one would you do?
But the point is, the choice shouldn't ever. No one should ever be in a position where their
I
choice
I
is
agree, no one
sweatshop
should be,
or
but it's a true dichotomy. Don't you agree? If it was the case as a true dichotomy, do you think child labor would be good?
obviously you'd pick child labor over sex labor as a child. Like
Right.
obviously, no one's ever
Exactly.
saying that.
So
But
that's what
the
I'm saying.
fact that
That's what
the
I'm
fact
arguing
that
for.
okay, but then that shouldn't be. If your worldview has led people to this choice, the worldview needs changing. Surely you could like, because people in the like the fact that
I
people
disagree.
in the West aren't in this predicament where they're choosing this, and I would stress that if you really think about it, we can see where elements of this do come to light. But on the whole, most people will never have this decision in our experience of the UK and the US.
Yeah,
But they
because
are in Bangladesh. Sorry, what did you say?
I was gonna say because we had this experience 150 years ago when America industrialized.
Yes, but that's like it was bad then and it's bad in Bangladesh. But the reason it's not so much in the West now isn't because we're inherently better or because we have liberal capitalist countries. It's because we had countries which had exploited the global south, and therefore when worker movements and such started advocating for people's rights and stuff, we had a better chance of being able to realize it. People in Bangladesh also think this is a horrendous choice, but because their state is, one which is used by the West to facilitate these unhealthy conditions, um, that they don't have the means to be able to change it. If Bangladesh were to say, okay, we're going to actually end all this exploitation, we're going to put things in place right now to make sure every child is in school and is able to access a fair education, and that on the whole we're going to have human rights at the centre of our stuff, that would massively impact the way capitalists have used the country to make a quick profit for themselves, and
I
then through the network of capitalism's organizations, so I mean things like the IMF and the World Bank and stuff, they would be measures in which Bangladesh would be dissuaded from such a pathway. They wouldn't, and let's not also forget there's people in Bangladesh who have more money which benefit from these things as well, right? There's people who are content with their place in the network of capitalism for this awful practice to continue. Um, I think that to go back to what you said a second ago, if the choice that you give someone is child labor in a sweatshop or horrific actions in sex labor and stuff as a child, then the system is atrocious. Like that is terrible.
Okay, but it's a truth of a reality. Can you name me a single country that's developed without having sweatshops?
None, because that's the point. That's the point we're saying. The system's bad. It shouldn't be like
Can
this.
you
That's why
can you name me an example of like any socialist mode of production which didn't use exploitative labor and which living standards were any higher?
we haven't
Possibly.
had a socialist
Oh right,
mode of
sorry,
production.
I forgot. Wait,
But like that's what we're saying. We want to progress beyond having to rely on exploitation and
but I
like
do
abuse and such.
I do want to touch on your point because you said that we could regulate this, right? Or we could do a different, we could like build infrastructure and capital to like improve living standards. This is exactly what the UK did. There's this paper that notes that at least 58,000 to 72,000 children under 13 were still working textile industries in 1851. Factory laws in Britain, such as the 1833 and 1844 acts, failed due to weak enforcement because families, quote unquote, continued to depend on children's earnings.
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. Like the horrific conditions of a market where you've got vast wealth being held at the top and people at the bottom basically being treated like cogs. Like that leads to horrendous situations where children have to go and work and such. Like
Right, but
the
what's the
fact
counter?
that sorry.
What's the solution? Can you
Well,
propose a
instead
solution?
of okay, well, to answer your question, the solution is that instead of Bob the capitalist basically having the entire factory as their own business and being able to take the majority of the proceeds of what is made by a factory for themselves, you would have a democratic workspace in which all those workers who have produced the product of a factory have some control over what is being produced by it and see the benefits of it. And then instead of, say, Bob the capitalist building a mansion, an estate, and a whole enterprise for themselves, whilst the families involved in the actual labour are sending their kids off to the factory, you'd have a democratically produced society. You'd be able to
So
have one where everyone benefits from the progress in technology. And
you
then
do,
you could repeat this the world over so that Bangladesh wasn't seeing this horrendous situation.
So that's exactly what worker cooperatives do, right? They democratically own the means of production. They democratically split the proceeds, and what that does is it stunts long-term growth. So they would be in a perpetual
No, but
state
that's
of like,
under
and
that
also
is
to be
like
clear, there still has to be workers like under that democratically owned means of production. You know?
but okay, but like when you're drawing from data from like worker co-ops now in a system which is capitalist, like they're not socialist. They are trying their best in systems which are set up to, for one, set up against their principles, but for two, actively like want to not have this happen because if a democratic
Well,
workspace exists, that doesn't mean you can profit from it as much, right?
well,
And
the
I would stress as well that there are co-ops that do well, and there are places where we've seen more democratic spaces that are massively improved things, but we can't remove this from the fabric of our social world in which people, the capitalism isn't just a system of economics, it's a system of power. So if you are, say, some like Bob the capitalist, right? Some rich British person who has got kids working in a factory to make a quick buck, like you want to maintain elements of this because it's how you make your money. So when people come along and say, okay, we actually want to have more of a say in what's going on in our workspace, you send in the police to break him up. You ban the right to strike. You ban unions. You, in Bangladesh, say, in other countries like that, have extremely repressive police enforcement, which
I
stop
don't think
people from organizing.
to be clear, I don't think capitalism is when the government does stuff. Like, I don't think the state enforcing anything is going to be necessarily a capitalist society. I think that the lock-in proviso of private property, materializes without the state as well. And on the point of what were we talking about? Sorry, what did you say before that? I kind of lost track.
That's all right. Was it about the co-ops or was it about child
Oh
labor?
yeah, yeah, right, right. So I think that even if you have a socialist mode of production, I think the cooperatives are like good empirical evidence to source. Just because you can see the extremely high time preferences, which is conducive to lower economic growth, and that's really my concern with when you democratize uh, the mode of production. Then you do see these high time preferences where people, because they have equitable stake in the company, they squander the goods right away instead of doing long-term investment because
Uh,
they you don't internalize any of the upside. Sorry, you internalize all of the downside, but you only share a small portion of the upside.
like just even if we accept all of like that, how can you say that in a society where people die because they can't eat, or that, like you said, in Bangladesh, people are in a sweatshop, that things aren't being squandered right now, far more than if things were to be democratically organized.
Well,
Like
I think
this obsession with growth, I find so like the growth is coming because like the profits that are being made and the money which is being hoarded by corporations in these countries is directly coming from the exploited labor in the global south and also in the countries themselves. You said yourself, right? They all
no,
relied on child labor and they all
I,
relied on sweatshops. And it's
I
just
disagree.
that now. Oh, sorry.
I disagree. I don't think they're hoarding wealth because wealth is created, not distributed. And I also disagree that. Um, so what was the thing you said? They're exploiting
Yeah,
workers.
like if your choice is work in this sweatshop or
Right.
go into a red light district and do some horrific things as a kid, that is a choice which is exploitative. That is just awful.
And
You've
that
essentially
exists.
got workers in a position where they, as you've just said, right, they have to pick the labor in the factory because there's no other way of eating or being able
Right.
to afford a house
And to be
or
clear,
rent
that
a
exists.
house.
To be clear, that exists under socialism as well. So the what I'm saying is that under socialism,
How
you're going
does
to
it
be doing
exist in
sex work.
socialism?
Under capitalism, you'd be working in a labor factory for a bit, and then rising
What?
standards of living would drop you off.
Sorry, you're working in it for a bit. Sorry, did you say?
Well, I mean, for generations, obviously.
But
Like I'm not, I'm
how
not,
is that fair? What?
I'm not saying it's perfect, but I'm saying it's much
But that's
better
the
than the
whole.
counterfactual.
But okay, but that then I would. What? But also, there's no. If you were in a socialist society, right? If we were
Yeah.
in socialism, our resources are managed democratically, right? So right now, resources from the global south are controlled and distributed by wealthy capitalists in the West, largely. Like the
To
resources that
be
are actually physically in the countries in question aren't belonging to people in that country. In a better system, you could organize things so some of the resources were sent to where they needed to, but there was enough in the communities that make them in the first place. So,
So
say you're a farmer in Bangladesh, you don't have to send off 99.9% of your stuff off to Nestle or whomever. You can actually have enough to eat and then build up the infrastructure of the villages. So they've got water systems and working, roads and schools. And then also, because you've improved that basic element of things, said society can cooperate with others and there can be communication and you can send resources where it's needed. So where you've got places where there's severe food insecurity, someone else can say, okay, well, we've got all this food, we can actually share this out, and society can cooperate together. At the moment, right now, it's not like that, and people starve and die and have to choose between
very
generations in a sweatshop or sex
so
work.
to be clear, this is what my view of things is. This is how a socialist mode of production would go. You'd socialize the means of production. People would have extremely high time preferences. We'd live in a very
High what?
primitivist
Sorry.
high time preferences. That means you prefer goods now rather than later. And this is on the point of why when you democratize the means of production, people don't internalize the upside, but they internalize all of the downside. Um, so the point is that they have very, very, very high risk profiles. So they want to squander the money now. So my point is that under socialist means of production, you would see people, instead of working sweatshops, they'd be working in child labor factories. They would
But there
not.
wouldn't be
We
child
wouldn't.
labour factories. Like,
They
I
would
don't
be.
mean to cut you off, but like, it's not.
You can't
Why
assume
would
it
there
away.
Sorry?
Even if you have a was it like a socialist means of production, you're still going to have this problem of child labor. You're still going to need to hire people into
Why
this
would
mode of
anyone
production
send their child to a factory if not for the conditions of capitalism? Like, what the only
because they
reason
would
they're
starve
there?
otherwise.
Sorry?
They would starve otherwise.
They wouldn't, because the food would be democratically controlled. It wouldn't be in
No,
some factory sat
they
off
were.
as a property of Nestle. It would be something that's communally
You
organised
can't.
and shared.
I don't think you can calculate without market prices. For example, so say,
What?
well, I don't think you can calculate a socialist mode of production. For example, so say there's a dude trying to build a bridge, right? And he has two options. He can either go through the tunnel using more dynamite and less steel, or he can build a rail track around the mountain. How does he know which one to use? He basically just uses the prices and profit system to determine which option would be more efficient. And if he chooses the option that's more efficient, then he's necessarily allocating resources more efficiently. And say he uses more dynamite instead of steel, right? That steel would have been more useful to like a construction person rather than the railroad itself. So my point is that with prices, it conveys information to entrepreneurs to tell them what option is going to be more efficient rather than which one to choose arbitrarily, which would be what you have in
Right, okay.
a social mode of production.
Let's take this example then, because it's an
Yeah,
interesting one, right? Should we build a track around the hill or mountain, or should we
and
drill straight through it,
yeah,
right?
and keep in mind
A
resources are scarce.
Okay, well, I mean, it's false scarcity, but let's
No, no,
ignore it for a second, right? In a socialist society, if you're trying to work out what is the best and most efficient way of doing something, you pull from different sources, right? So there's more than one branch of science that's involved in this element, right? So you've got geography, the actual allocation of materials, what's the best way to safely blow up stuff in a hill,
but
how
how?
do we think about the ecology of this environment,
Wait,
how do we... What, sorry?
yeah, can I just point out you can't do a trade-off between safety and price without actually having a working pricing mechanism, and
Okay,
you can't do
let's
so
let's
without.
ignore pricing for let's ignore pricing for a second,
But
right?
I just don't.
In
You're
a
bringing this up with all these constraints, but you have no way to like measure the trade-offs.
but the point is you come together and discuss it and organize it collaboratively. Under capitalism right
But that
now,
doesn't.
right? The corporation just says, well, this is all our land, so we're doing it however we like, and we can actively ignore the study that might say, okay, well, actually, maybe we shouldn't blow up this hill, or maybe we shouldn't bulldoze these trees to build a track around it.
No,
And what, sorry?
to be clear, even under capitalist mode of production, liabilities and torts solves like negative externalities such as like destroying the environment.
It doesn't. I mean, it'll come on to environmental destruction in a second, right? But
What do you mean it
the
doesn't? Like
well, because how can you say that the what is it, liabilities? Sorry, say what you said again. Sorry.
liabilities and torts. So, for example, if I start polluting your house, right? Like if I just, I have a factory right next to your house and the air pollution is super high, it
Yeah.
it constitutes me suing you. Or you suing me.
But I can't because, like, for one, right? So let's say, okay, this is actually quite a good example. The factory is polluting. I
Yep.
want to say something about it. Can I afford legal representation to sue
Right.
a
So
massive corporation?
there are
No.
lawyers
Can
who
I?
there are
What?
lawyers who don't require funding. They take money out of the proceeds from
Yeah,
winning.
pro bono, and
Yeah.
they're under resourced, and they're going against massive corporations that win in court anyway because they've
But
got the money to be involved. They say they say, oh, we're driving up growth, and they're allowed to continue polluting, and that exact thing happens all the time. And it's just taken for part of the proceeds of capitalism. Pollution is rampant right now in the world. We're in a climate crisis. The environment quite literally has been commodified to the point where we're killing off the planet, and nothing is done because it's good for business or whatever. It's the decision of the capitalists right now. Like, how many acres of rainforest have been bulldozed and cut down
so
because some capitalists thought they've got like a business incentive there right now?
So to be clear, most corporations aren't responsible for the carbon emissions. So I've actually looked into this a bit. The
What?
Right. So it's between scope 1 and scope 3 emissions. So scope 1 emissions arise from the self-consumption of fuel, flaring, venting, or fugitive releases of methane. Scope 3 emissions account for 90% of total company emissions, and the result of downstream combustion, coal, oil, gas, and energy purposes. And a small fraction of fossil fuel production is used in non-energy applications which sequester carbon, like plastics. So the 100 companies are actually only responsible for 6.5% of scope 1 global emissions, not 70% when you actually take in the variables of, like actual damage. And I can link you the article here. It's from Alter 2020. Um,
If you put it in the YouTube chat, but I mean, firstly, even if we were to
it's mostly
accept that as
China.
sorry,
It's
yeah, a
mostly
country
China.
competing on the free market to try and get up.
No,
Like, the
no,
fact that it's
they
happening in
are.
China doesn't discount the fact that it's the capitalist process which is happening. Secondly, 6.5% of all global emissions, even if it were just that, which I would like to read that paper to be honest, but that is still disproportionately massive. Thirdly, the reason it's so nefarious and bad at the moment is because we can't hold these corporations to account. As the skeptical leftist says in the chat, if there's no mechanism for holding corporations to account, then they can do whatever they want. There's no, like, the factory that has been, to go back to your example, the factory that's been built in my neighborhood and is spewing out all sorts of smog and residual chemicals and such. I don't have the capital on the market to do anything about this because it's
Hello?
there. It's Oh, can you still hear me? Hello? Hello? Oh, Hamsters has lagged out, he says in the chat. I'll wait for him to come back. Hello to Dargesh as well, by the way. I've been seeing your comments. A few of them have made me laugh a little bit. Yeah, loads of interesting things you're both saying. Hamsters is back.
I clicked a button on my phone and it said down. Okay, why are there two of me?
Because I don't know what happened to him. He must have signed in via a different way. Can you hear me now, Hamsters?
Yeah. So I didn't hear anything you said after I made my refutation or retort back. So can you just?
Yeah, of course. I'm trying to think. What was I saying? Okay, yeah, the factory. Okay, if someone puts a factory in your neighborhood, right, and it's spewing out CO2, it's spewing out smog. There's residual chemicals just everywhere. They're not treating their waste properly. It's just an environmental mess, and it's affecting people. It's their private property, and they can do what they like on it because that is the logic the market has given them. The mechanism for which I can address that is market based, right? I can try and use my capital to beat them in the free market, but I can't because I'm a worker. I'm just an ordinary person of an ordinary salary. I don't have millions or even billions to try and compete with some massive
You
corporation.
can. You
But
can.
how can I?
Are
How
you are
can I?
you
Unless I'm a
familiar with the
millionaire, how can
Are
I?
you familiar with the Epic Games Fortnite antitrust lawsuit?
Uh,
So, for
Enlighten me. What
example,
what happened in the
a bunch of kids who are like 17 and 18 got hundreds of dollars back from Epic Games because companies would come together and like lawyers because there's actual a profit incentive because they can take a fraction of the proceeds. So they would basically just recruit a bunch of teenagers and a bunch of people who played Fortnite and spent a bunch of money on the game. And they basically just won a lawsuit against Epic Games. For example, I spent like $500 on Fortnite when I was 16, and I got $500 back.
How?
That's that. No,
Okay,
I'm.
the fact
So
that
you're, a
okay,
16-year-old
but
just beat a multinational billion-dollar company.
was this for like microtransactions or something like
Yeah,
that?
it was for microtransactions. It was negative
Okay, I'm
externality of
very glad.
exploitation.
I think that it's great that I'm very glad you won back your money that you lost. But can you see that even in that scenario, they didn't lose. They lost what they profited off you, so they're on net zero, right? They're still a multi-billion corporation. You
Yeah,
still
there's nothing.
needed the help of it was still people with existing capital to some extent doing this, and critically and crucially, it's not quite the same as like the fact that microtransactions exist is terrible. It's an example of bad profiteering policies from corporations trying to make even more money off an industry, right?
I
And
disagree.
has
I
you
think
said what
microtransactions are great.
you just said you just said you won money back off them to
Well, I want money. I don't think microtransactions are bad. For example, I
so,
think that it's a positive sum game because values are subjective. For example, if I value a Fortnite skin at like $25 and Epic Games values the skin at like $20 and I trade it, I'm necessarily gaining more than I lose, and they're necessarily gaining more than they lose.
right. Okay, we'll talk about microtransactions in a minute, right? Because like that's you think it's nice that you can buy skins and stuff. That's great. Epic Games is a massive like corporations like Epic Games have a colossal impact in the industry, right? They basically dominate the scene. If you want to make a video game and it's not an indie one, and even then, it's it's essentially it's you have to have a massive corporation behind you. So they are happy to eat the costs of the microtransaction lawsuit that comes in when they have to give some money back because they've already got themselves miles in the lead with their profits and such, and they have realized they can afford to lose a bit of it later on. That is massively different to a corporation putting a factory in place and starting polluting and such. Firstly, because one of these things is a massive. The factory is part of the employment, the transport networks, the production of goods. It's implicated in the capitalist economy, and so it can make it easier to keep itself in place. And secondly, pollution, as Capitalism says, it's once you've breathed in that smog, your lungs are in a bit of a bad way. Once you've put all the CO2 into the atmosphere, it's going to take a bit longer than just reversing a microtransaction to get it back. That's why it's critical to go after the capitalist mode of production, like more than just we can sue this company because the whole method of production is the issue. Like it's
Yeah,
not
there's
good.
no, I disagree. I mean, I think that, you know, what you said, you outlined that um what's different with a factory is that they create like these consumer goods, they create all the smog, but that's completely compatible with like the same idea of Epic Games doing microtransactions. They're creating consumer goods, they're creating, microtransactions, they're creating all these type of things. So the
Well,
same way that you could do like a lawsuit, like a pro bono lawsuit even at that, is gonna work with the with like factories as well. And you did mention that they've already polluted, but they wouldn't do so in the first place unless it's profitable. And if
but
they
that's the
know
point.
that
It shouldn't. That's
it's
the
not
point,
profitable,
though. That's the
if
it is that they did it like because if you were gonna start a factory right now, like if you're playing like I don't know Sims or something, Sim City, like you get all the options where it's like well if you put this factory in, it will do X and it'll do Y, but you might think, okay, well, this is going to have a bad impact on the environment, so I'm not going to put in the coal power plant. We're going to use solar panels instead. But they have done this because, as you've just said, they're seeking a profit. So they ignore the health of the people in society and the world in general
no, they
because they're
wouldn't.
chasing profit.
They wouldn't because the looming
But they
threat of
have,
a
they are.
well, they're not.
But they are.
I no, I
Look what's
demonstrated how 10% of Scope 1 emissions or sorry, 6% of Scope 1 emissions are from private corporations from the United States, and the rest are from like China and also other these more like social centrally planned
it's like
economies.
hold on a second, right? USA
Go
global emissions.
Yeah,
Um,
check the link I sent you. It's from Scope 1.
okay, right, hold
It
on a
it
second.
whatever article you
Like
pull up
that
won't differentiate Scope 1 versus Scope 3 emissions
doesn't change the fact that the pollution, no matter where it's coming from, is still being
from a
conducted through
centrally planned
capitalist
authority.
logics.
Okay, so for
Sorry.
example, 68 because the emissions are coming from a centrally planned authority, which is like more akin to socialism. 68% of China's GDP in
That
2023
isn't
was generated by state-owned enterprises. They centrally plan everything. They have a 5-year plan. They dictate the Chinese economy in the form of 5-year plans. China executes more corrupt billionaires than any nation on the planet. 66% of companies listed on the Chinese
China.
stock exchange are state-owned. Like,
China
come on,
is
that's
on the
socialist.
China is on the capitalist market hamster. It
No,
sets
no,
up
no, no.
special economic zones to engage in the
Six,
practices which generate a lot of its wealth. It's not a
six,
social. It's not
no, no.
worker owned, is it?
This not
Um,
true. This 68% of China's GDP in 2023 was generated by state-owned enterprises. So if we're accounting for what actually works
yeah,
for
the
them and
state,
what they're
which
doing
is a
mostly.
vehicle of capitalists. It's not
No, no, no. The
like
state is not a vehicle of do you think capitalism is when the government does stuff?
I think that the states that we have in the world are things which exist through the capitalist world. So the fact that, for instance, capitalists pour money into political parties which enact pro-capitalist right-wing policies is an example of how states operate for capitalists. Like what we were saying earlier about countries in the global south, they have to engage in practices which favor this global system because they're part of this global world. Um, America could do many things right now to improve its environment, but they do the opposite. I mean, look at the Trump administration gutting environmental regulations. They do this because they want to earn, they want to be able to make more profit. They want to be able to exploit the land more. And so, to go back to this example of the workers, living around polluted environments and stuff, they don't have the power to be able to change things because they don't have the same capital. They aren't able to be in government trying to do things.
Wait,
I
but
have been sent something.
to be clear, so the answer is yes, you do think that government when the government does stuff that's akin to capitalism?
That you're not seeing what I'm saying. Like the
Well,
government, who
you
is
said it
the
could be
agent of
instrumentally,
capitalists.
but it can also
Like
be the agent of socialism, correct?
no, but they can't because a socialist. If you are a socialist, you're advocating for a deconstruction of power structures. You're critiquing
I
the
don't
power structure.
I
The
don't
capitalist. What? Sorry.
I like wholly disagree with that. Like evolutionary
But how
socialism,
can you?
because that's not baked into like communism or socialist theory. Karl Marx, in his critique to the Gotha program, wrote about how the state is instrumentally useful for promoting socialist ideals. Um,
Useful, but that's one person writing, and he doesn't say that this is the end
but
and only fall of socialism, does he?
do you not think
Use
that Karl Marx is like one of the big figures in socialist theory?
I think he's one person who wrote about it. I don't think we should be reifying every single word he said. And I
What
also don't
are you
think that he did
familiar with?
say. I don't think he would point to China as it exists now and say, yes, this is the socialist dream. This is a socialist. Like, no, of course he
Well,
wouldn't.
he was anti-idealist, right? So he would not say that it is the socialist ideal, but he would say it's tending towards socialism. And
But
the
he
point I'm
wouldn't
trying
say
to
it's
make,
tending towards. How can a nation with special economic zones for corporations to put their stuff there is
wait, hold on,
not tending towards socialism?
68% of China's GDP in 2023 was generated by state-owned enterprises. They execute more
That
billionaires
doesn't.
than any nation.
A state owned
This is
like
the dictatorship of the proletariat at work.
but you can't seriously believe that because
Of
the
course I
state
believe it.
isn't democratically controlled, is it? If like the Chinese state is not a vehicle of workers, it's a capitalist
Wait,
state. It's capitalists who have
they have
organized
elections.
themselves. Sorry,
They do have elections.
are they free and fair elections, hamsters?
I mean,
You can't you're gonna seriously tell me that they
but
democratically chose
do you
this?
think well they don't. You're talking about Xi Jinping, right? But
Yeah,
do you know?
you're not gonna seriously tell me that China
But
has
they do
free and
elect.
fair elections.
They have like what's it called, like the 10 chairmen or something like that. They do elect people. Like they
Yeah,
do have legitimate
through
elections,
a
but
mechanism which
not
is
for Xi
not
Jinping.
democratic.
Not for Xi Jinping, but they do elect people.
Yeah, but people who right. This is another point about capitalism. Right, politics is concentrated in various ways to ensure that the same um, basic policies are maintained. Right, like, 'cause, like let's think about America for example. To go back to that example of the factories and the workers, one of the ways that I might want to change things is to vote for someone who will regulate the corporation. So if I'm living next door to this horrible factory, I might think, okay, well the mayor has not done anything, that my governor, the Senate hasn't done anything. Let's vote for someone new. But the politicians who get elected are largely, certainly in Western countries, especially in a one-party state like China, people who are of the system. And because the system is capitalist, because it relies on private property and free market principles, and the idea that you can profit off things and hold wealth for yourself, nothing really changes. So, as you said earlier, the fact that people were using exploitative factory labor to build wealth in the 1800s,
I
it
don't think it
still
was.
felt it. Sorry.
To be clear, I don't think it's exploitative.
Great, that's fantastic. Okay, you don't think it, what? Okay, the fact that sweatshop labor, which you don't think is exploitative, is being used in the 1800s and still being used now, is part of the reason we're saying that the states that exist are part of the capitalist structure. I cannot believe that, Axel, you're putting it's a win for hamsters, but he's just said that. Like, I mean, what
Well,
are you
I mean,
saying?
I think I made a good case. No, I put like 3 studies out. I put the case of
Yeah,
Bangladesh. I
none
gave
of
you
the
a case study.
studies. Like, okay, but you said yourself you would not want to work in a sweatshop. So how can you,
Of course
like,
not. But
yeah? So then how would you? How is
it's
this good?
because it's a true dichotomy. If
What
I
does
gave
that
you the
have to do
option,
with anything?
okay, if you were given the situation of either child labor or working as a sex worker, which one would you do? And
That
which one is better?
if that is the choice, we need to look at how we've got there. Like, it's like saying,
No,
oh, would
no,
you?
it's baked into the hypothetical. You can only choose one or the other. Which one are you choosing?
I've already given you my answer to that question. You know which one we'd pick. That
Exactly.
doesn't.
So this is why it's good. It's a true dichotomy.
Yeah, but okay.
There's no getting
If
around
you
it.
okay, if you
I
hamsters,
disagree.
if you woke up like if you woke up and you were in this situation, like, and you had all the knowledge you do now, would
Yeah.
you not think this is ridiculous? Why am I having to choose this? Would you not think this is a terrible way for us to live our
I would
life?
be very upset, and I would know
Yes,
that
and why? Why would
it's
you
a
be upset?
dichotomy because I'm in a situation where there's 2 terrible options and there's no third option. What you're
Yes,
saying is
so
that there
then
is a third
change the
option.
system then.
There's not a third option. I promise you, no matter what you change, it's gonna result in a worse, outcomes. Like you can do regulations. It's been proven to be worse. There's synthetic studies on that as well. You can do these things where you do investment. That doesn't help either. What you need is private investment into these into
But
these
private
countries.
investment is what has produced this in the first place. Like, do you
Where
not think?
there's no
Why do
evidence
you
for
think?
that. There's no
Why do
causal
you
evidence
think a
that private
company?
investment.
Why do you think a company like Gap puts its factories in places like Bangladesh and in the special economic zones in China? Why do you think they're there and not in Britain and America?
Low labor costs, but that doesn't
Well, yeah,
necessarily
I mean,
destroy my
so there you
point
go. Why is that?
because they're not industrialized countries
And why aren't they industrialized countries?
because of socialism, because of
What?
because of poor modes of production. They haven't industrialized like
What
the
were okay?
states
Let's
in the
go
UK
back.
in the 1850s. Wait, to be
What
clear,
were
by the way,
they
I
before?
do think we should. Yeah, we can keep going on with this, but also I do want to talk about Mamdani and
Yeah,
modern
we'll get onto
politics
Mamdani
after
because
as
that's
well.
a very
It's gonna be
Mamdani's
very long. For that, I figure.
Indeed, we'll have to do a part 2 at some point. But yeah, we'll try and get onto Mamdani. But surely you can see that if we rewind, the reason these countries cannot industrialize in the same way that Britain, America, France, whatever did, which I will stress was still full of the same exploitation, is because a country like Bangladesh, like India, like Pakistan, like in sub-Saharan Africa, these are colonies. These are countries that were taken over by the Western powers, exploited for their wealth, and then did not have the same tools we did in our countries to be able to improve. Like, that's
No,
the
I
point.
disagree. I disagree. I don't think I think colonialism is typically bad, but I don't think it's intrinsically bad in the case of
Not
Hong Kong, right?
intrinsically bad.
Yes, it's instrumentally bad for well-being when they do oppressive practices, but it's instrumentally useful sometimes. For example, in the case of Hong Kong, where they, pursued a very laissez-faire economy, in the
And
1950s, there was
produced
like
the
one
same, the same. The Kowloon walled city was near Hong Kong, was it not?
what?
The Kowloon walled city and places like that, and where
Are you talking about?
massive.
No, are you
What's
talking about
that?
like the situation that caused the Melee fire?
No, I'm talking about massive like slums and such, and
Okay, but do
places
you
of poor
to be
economic.
clear, you can fact check this right now. Do you agree that, under the Crown Colony of Hong Kong, public spending was about 10% of GDP, national income?
I have no doubt there were
Okay.
neoliberal policies in
So,
Hong Kong.
yeah, I agree. It was a neoliberal policy. But do you also agree that rising living standards in 1850 to 1990 occurred? Like massive living standard increases. Do you agree with that?
Yes, these were not felt equally through the system, and they are mediated on a global scale by
Wait, but I
the
just
other
want to.
factors. Wealth inequality in Hong Kong is colossal. Cost of living right now
By the way,
is shocking in Hong Kong,
no,
as it is
well,
anywhere.
they're under Red China right now. First of all, but also they pursued a YIMBY policy. That 10% was mostly for housing stock. Let me pull the exact number up. Hold on.
But also, that doesn't change that it like many other places, was like the fact that Bangladesh and places like that have been treated so badly can be directly tied to colonialism. And people from Hong Kong would say similar. Like if Hong Kong was given its own, if it shouldn't have to be a choice between being a neoliberal tool for Western countries or being part of China, another capitalist country, another state that wants to use it for profit and such. It should be democratic and it should be able to manage its own resources, as everyone should be able to.
Nope.
In a cooperative global socialist world.
By the way, so
let's
colonialism was actually instrumentally useful for protecting them against Red China. But to be clear, they pursued a very YIMBY policy out of that 15% of national income. It was 10 to
what does that
15%.
have to do with what we've said?
Well, I'm saying neoliberal policy does work. It has a very strong efficacy. Let me pull. There's this quote from Milton Friedman. I first visited Hong Kong in 1955, shortly after the inflow of initial refugees. It was a miserable place for most of the inhabitants. The temporary dwellings that the government had thrown up to house the refugees were one-cell, multi-story buildings that was open in the front, one family, one room. So then Hong Kong allowed 6 million immigrants in by 1998, just to be clear. And the statistics were in 1960, the earliest date which Milton Friedman was able to collect data for, the average capita in Hong Kong was 28% of that of Great Britain's. In 1996, it had risen to 137% of Britain's. So they literally became richer than Britain by pursuing a laissez-faire economy. They literally just pursued a very YIMBY housing policy.
When you say they, that isn't everyone in that's corporations and wealthy individuals within Hong Kong who then get to claim representation of all of Hong Kong through being based in Hong Kong and such.
But we can look at median as well.
Sorry?
So are you saying that wealth is distributed unequally?
Yeah, there's unequal distribution of wealth in places like Hong Kong and such, and also in other places which have like big urban areas and such. Like the development in the West has a higher quality of life than Bangladesh, for instance.
And Cuba, yes.
But clearly this isn't felt equally because not everyone has access to the resources and not everyone is of the same wealth standing. Let's come on to Mamdani,
wait. To be clear, I don't think that it's felt equally. But what I'm saying is the average Hong Kong resident by 1990 was better off than the average the average British resident, just by averaging it out by average GDP per capita.
A mean average is not a good way to measure welfare, is it? Because
welfare is not bimodally distributed; it's normally distributed, so the average is going to be the same as the median and the mode.
Sorry, say that again. Sorry.
So, wealth is going to be distributed normally. So, if you look at the average person, it's also going to be the same as the median wealth. It's going to be the same as the most common wealth, which is the mode, right? If you look at the income,
that's what I'm saying. The
income
wealth, that's what I'm saying, though. The wealth of people in Hong Kong is not. Some people are extremely wealthy in Hong Kong, and others are basically living a hell trying to afford rent. Sorry?
No, most people were very well off. They were better off than the British by 1990. I'm not sure what you mean by hell. There's not really any qualifiers that I can work off of.
The experience of people living in Hong Kong, a lot of them are not very happy. But
today, yes.
Let's come on to then as well. It's not like they're unified, and they also shouldn't. It shouldn't even be this level of this sort of organization either. There shouldn't be a choice between colonialism and China, which is another form of exploitation.
I agree. China is a very imperialist country.
Yes, and that's bad. And the other stuff that's happened is bad as well. The whole point is the whole.
It's because of the government. It's because of the government. And socialism is when the government does stuff.
What? No, it isn't.
Yes, it is, bro. It is.
No, what have I been saying about workers?
People
in society.
Socialist theory, bro. Socialist theory.
That is not. No,
it is. It is baked into socialist theory. Okay. Anyways,
it really isn't. Let's come on to Mamdani.
I do need to use the bathroom first, but
that is fine. We're approaching 2 hours. Skeptical Leftist has finished listening along. I'm sure we'll chat about it at some point. But yeah, my goodness. Dargesh says, Axel, if you are a slave and your master feeds you, is that a good economic system? This is a really good point, right? Like, we're stuck in a system which allows power to concentrate in extremely wealthy people's hands. And that leads to this, right? That leads to people being in control and then framing themselves as good for having granted the bare minimum, often through force and such, to their workers and such. Axel says inequality is based, and it's just not the case, is it, Axel? My goodness. Yes, Dargesh sent me something in Discord, which I will try and pull up. Let's share my screen again. How do I do that? Learn to use computer, Zohran. My goodness. Let's see. History of reducing air pollution from transportation in the United States.
All right. I'm back. So I was thinking, is it cool if we do things like one by one? Because I don't want to jump between too many topics. So I figure, I did write an article a while ago. Alfie, stop. Wait, hold on. My dog's jumping on me. I figure we can talk about the busing policy first. Free busing.
Yeah, I mean, we can start with buses if you want. Public transport, obviously.
Yeah, public transport, and then we can go into like housing, and then grocery stores.
I mean, I think we should start with like Mamdani. I think we should stress very popular. Someone who's very there's been a lot of focus on him, a lot of celebration, and I think he's a real breath of fresh air given the horrible sort of conditions that people have had to live under for quite a long time. But go on, what were you going to say about him? Sorry.
Yeah, I agree. He's very popular. Like legitimately, all of my friends like him. It's like actually crazy. I don't want to dox myself, but I'm sort of in the New York area. I didn't vote. But I do think all of his policies are pretty terrible. So with fast and free buses, I guess maybe you want to make the case first for it.
Well, transport is good because it reduces the number of cars you have to depend on and can help people get from A to B very easily. And by enabling people's movement to be easier, especially if you can't afford a car in one of the most built-up, expensive cities in the world, you can improve the economy. And obviously, Mamdani is suggesting this as an amendment to a capitalist system. He's not going to click a button and then socialism will happen, a worker-owned system. But in terms of what you can do right in this moment in time, yes, it's a really promising and good way to help the US, or help New York in this specific case.
Okay, so I'm going to argue that it's actually going to be destructive to do. Hold on. Can you close the screen share? It's like, okay, yeah. For some reason I have it on Discord, but I clicked it through my mobile app, so it's like very laggy. But so if you look at MTA data, which is the transportation, like survey polling, you can actually see the thing that people are most dissatisfied with is going to be, or sorry, unsatisfied with is going to be waiting times, frequency of delays, travel times, and crowding. And there's just a lot of data that shows that congestion pricing over free buses is going to be actually more conducive to well-being in the case of lowering crowding, lowering waiting times. So I can actually, if you want to open my Substack, I actually have the pictures there.
Can you put a link in the YouTube? Hold on a second.
Yeah, I put in the YouTube. So, right. And, are you aware of Mamdani's pilot program that he put?
No, go on, you tell me.
Yeah, so the study found an 80% increase in assaults in line Q4. Had a terrible sample size of about 47 cases, and he just made a number out of thin air in one of his ads. He said that the safety drop was...
I don't think this quite adds up, really, Hamsters. Like, I think when we're thinking about...
I can link you the paper.
It is being proposed here. We're trying to make available transport for everyone. If everyone can access their city, the city improves. There's more. We shouldn't have it. Well,
it increases congestion. It increases congestion.
How can it increase congestion if we fund the public transport properly? How to increase
It's the
congestion?
principle of induced demand. A 2011 study conducted by Turner and Duranton found a 1% increase in, for example, highway capacity increases to a perfectly proportional increase in traffic. When you increase busing capacity, it induces demand. When you make it free, it induces demand. So when people complain about crowding, right, and you get rid of congestion pricing, it actually just congests the roads more. It congests buses more. And there's really good empirical evidence because Mamdani actually had a pilot program in which he cited a safety with a drop of 38.9% violence against drivers. I'm going to link you that study. Here, so Mamdani cited this.
Where
So if you look at the statistical malpractice, he has a tiny sample size. And if you forget about that, he just makes this number out of thin air. You won't find the number
can you? I
38.9%.
can't see where you've sent this
Oh,
link to
sorry.
that,
You know,
brother.
I'll just send it to you on Discord. And I'll send you my Substack there as well. So he straight up just makes his number out of thin air. And the data shows that the system-wide assaults dropped by 15.4%. But then when you aggregate all of it, the actual program dropped.
So am I looking at eliminating NYC bus fares? Is this so? This is the document Mamdani produced.
So you know how Mamdani used to be part of like what was he, like city council or some part of the
Yeah.
government? So he had a pilot program for free buses, and they had 4 lines. And line 4, actually, if you look at the paper, found an 80% increase in assaults. And by the way, just to be clear, we can completely
Where am I?
dismiss.
Sorry, is this paper? Where's the paper that you've
Oh,
says all
my
this?
paper, my Substack.
Your Substack has the paper that repudiates the stuff in
Yeah,
Mamdani's.
and there's another paper here by Matt Darling, which basically demonstrates how even if the results were good, we can just completely dismiss all of it because a 40 sample size is terrible. There was 47 cases of assault and 32 after, so it's an entirely weak inference with zero
Right.
like statistical significance. You agree with that, right?
So no, I don't think I do agree with this analysis because the point of Mamdani's policy is to, for one, be part of many other policies that you'd implement. You'd also improve the educational costs. You'd also improve the way people can access resources.
Wait, but we're
Um,
focusing on
and
just busing though right
but
now.
you can't just focus on one. It's all coming together. That's the whole point. It's
Well,
not an individual.
we are gonna
No,
talk about
of
that, just to be
course, but
clear.
Mamdani, like politics on, it's not like a toggle where you click it on and off and such. It is impacted and impacting of other things. So, like the reason public transport is sometimes unsafe is because people in heavily populated areas that are defunded and don't have access to the same healthcare, education, food security, and such produce people who find it harder to cope, to be in the environment with people. And so, in the packed bus, say, or in waiting around and such, that can
Yeah.
lead to points of tension where something escalates. So, actually,
Do you have
making it so
empirical
that they
evidence of
wouldn't.
this though?
Sorry,
Do you have any like empirical evidence of this being true?
what do you mean empirical evidence?
Like a study that found like, maybe they implemented free busing and then, violent crime decreased or maybe crowding decreased or anything? Because I'm
Is
very unconvinced that any sort of free busing actually decreases crowding, which is the most reported issue. And there's like, for example, Knoll
free
in 2001 found.
transport would, if more people could use free transport, there'd be fewer cars in such areas, which would improve
There's
things, which would
there's
improve
already
pollution, and critically, it comes with other policies and improvements as well. It's not, that's sort of what we're saying. We're not just isolating our improvements to like one or two separated policies. It's the whole thing has to improve. Mamdani's vision for New York that he wants to try and implement involves many improvements which make things better in a whole host of ways.
oh
And I
no.
think also a country like America, which has been extremely right wing for a very long time, is always going to have a problem with saying, "Oh, well, we haven't seen this yet. So how can we know?" We haven't
Wait,
seen
but
it because it's been so right wing. We need to have the change to
hold on.
experience it in the first place.
Hold on. You said there's going to be less cars with more busing through some like sort of crowding out effect, but how many cars do you think are already in New York City? No one really uses cars. Everyone
No
uses
one really
bikes or
uses cars.
yeah, I promise you, like very few people use cars. I have data on, but I'm like curious. What do you think the average? What do you think per capita? How many cars there are?
No idea. You tell me.
It's 0.2, and it gets significantly less as you get to the inner city where a lot of the bus programs are. So it's very, very useless in terms of
It's not useless
crowding
though,
out
is it? Because
parts.
there still are cars there. You would be able to have people using
They're
buses
basically
more, relying on more regular transport links. You'd have an easier time getting around. You would crucially make the economy and the city more accessible and better for more people, thus alleviating many of the other economic problems and quality of life problems that New Yorkers experience. And
no,
having, yes, of course it is. If you're
no.
not having to
His
spend the
bus
money
program,
on, if
his
you're not
bus
having to
program.
spend the money on the buses, then you can afford to spend it on other things, which are also more
Sure,
easily
why
improved.
not? So my point is that it's just squandering money, $16.5 million
How is it
dollars
squandering
in
money?
losses because
How is
there's
improving the lives of millions of New
it,
Yorkers?
it does not improve the lives of millions of New
It
Yorkers. It
does.
increases crowding, increases assaults,
It
it
means they don't have to
increases.
pay for the bus. They don't have to spend
But
money
do you
that
think
they
do you
would.
think that's do you think that's an issue for people? Do you,
Yes,
can you
they
show
they
me
can't.
any MTA data that shows that people actually are complaining about fair options? In fact,
I can
eighty-three
tell
percent,
you for
eighty-three
certain.
percent of people are reporting fair options being satisfied. So how could it be the case that
What is how
anyone
many?
is
Sorry.
actually dissatisfied? 83%. I can give you the, actually just
Okay, well, if we accept that number as fact, what is 70% of the population of New York?
but
That's
but but
a
don't you
lot of
think you should
people.
address don't you think you should address the 63% of people who are saying that fares are actually the issue and not, payment options or payments?
Fares,
Yeah. Sorry, crowding. Sorry, crowding. Don't
crowding
you
is going to be something which can also be alleviated through a
it,
better functioning economy, through a better, healthier system. It's also, I think, inevitable that in a city there's going to be some element of busyness,
can you
but clearly the cost of living crisis, which is affecting the vast majority of people to in varying degrees, is something which needs to be addressed, which a program like free transport does. And with the other programs that Mamdani advocates for, will improve the material conditions in someone's life.
right, I
Now,
mean you keep saying this, but you haven't shown me any like empirical evidence of this, and I've given you like four papers. I've given you Nolan 2011, I give you Durrington 2011.
right,
It,
if you really want
in
me to produce a study here, I'm sure I can find one quickly for
right,
you.
but the point is you haven't looked into this before, and you're doing all these
Of
deductions.
course I have. I
Can
wouldn't be
you?
saying this if just off the cuff.
But
Like
so do you agree that
the cost
induced
of
demand?
living crisis is something which is real, which has
But
been
do you
studied.
so do you agree that induced demand exists?
In what way? What do you mean?
Well, like Nolan 2000, Durton 2011 finds that a 1% increase in highway capacity leads to a perfectly one proportional 1% increase in traffic. Do you think that is like something that exists in markets?
Oh, sorry, say that again. A 1%.
I'll just link you the study. Durton 2011 finds that a 1% increase in traffic capacity leads to a perfectly 1% increase in traffic. Oh, the American Economics Association website is actually down, so you won't be able to see the paper, but it says the AEA website is experiencing technical
So
difficulties
what's
right
your concern? That there'll be more traffic?
No, there would be more crowding.
So what, more people using the bus?
There would be more crowding on the bus, yeah.
And yeah, if let's say this were to happen,
Yep, and then people's issues, which they're already reporting, would be exacerbated. And the issue that people are most satisfied with would be, not changed because it's a non-issue to begin with.
it's not a non-issue.
It
How
is
can
a
you?
not.
People can't afford to use a bus.
Okay, so do you agree that doing this would be a trade-off between crowding and fares?
I don't think would be a trade-off. I think that more people might be able to use a bus, but if you've put money into the actual service by obviously using money in a better way, um, you would be able to run more services potentially, and
Wait, that
critically,
doesn't
if
follow.
what do you mean it doesn't follow?
If you spend more money on this, you're necessarily squandering money that you could have used on a different program.
But you okay, you're making people who have a lot of money pay more tax. You'd raise the tax rate.
No, or wait, sorry, you said a 1% increase in taxes, or are you
No,
for
no,
that? Or
you would increase the you make the rich pay more to fund the poverty. Obviously, you're not.
okay,
Um,
but even if I do grant that, which I disagree that you can tax the rich, but even if that's the case, right? And you get that money, why would you waste it? What would you think you should
how
put
is
a
it a
million?
waste?
Because it's making people worse off. Do you think you should spend
It's
a
not.
million?
They can
do-
afford to use the bus. That's good. They can afford to
But
access the
that's
city.
but that makes the issue of crowding much worse, which most buses are reporting. Okay, listen,
You'd
listen.
have more buses to run on the routes. Like you could run the bus every
Yeah,
10
but
minutes
the
instead of every
prince
20 minutes.
I've
So
already addressed this through the principle of induced demand through like several longitudinal studies. The point is
well, we haven't addressed what.
I have
Yeah.
addressed this.
How can okay if you put more buses on the route, then you're not having as many people cram onto the same
What do you think
one
happens?
bus.
What do you think happens when you increase highways?
Increase.
Highways, like when you increase lanes, why do you think crowding gets worse?
What do you mean? Like you mean like the cars, the vehicles are crowding, or do you mean the
Yeah,
actual
yeah,
crowding on the
congestion.
bus itself?
Congestion in highways. I'm drawing an analogy here to demonstrate like the principle of
Okay,
induced
well, you
demand.
would also, along with that, you'd also have green policies to reduce the number of vehicles. So that you'd have more, you make it easier for public transport to be enabled, and you'd have less
Wait,
incentive to use your car in the city
but that's
centre.
not relevant to the principle of reduced demand. My point is that when you increase highway capacity, you increase congestion,
Yes,
and the
but
same thing
you're
follows for
negating
buses.
that by making public transport more amenable. You're negating the use of cars to some extent.
But
You
I've
are
already
also
I also addressed this by
reducing the.
remember point two per capita in New York City, and this includes boroughs that aren't very densely populated. And so when you look at the more the densely populated areas where the busing actually is, then this is a non-issue because there's barely any cars to begin with. Like, have you been to New York City before? Have you seen how many
I've
cars
not
there
been
are?
to New York before,
There's
no.
barely any cars. I trust me. I promise you, there's barely any cars. The data, supports this notion. Point two per capita in all five boroughs. There's really no need for
And
busing. Look,
even if it was more congested, which I will not accept by the way, I don't believe this quite follows based on what you've said. Even if there were more congestion, people would still be able to get to the city for free or get around the city for free in a place they were not able to previously. And public transport isn't just buses; it's also improvements to other forms, like the metro system and such. Right? It's a whole system implementation. It's not just we're gonna chuck some more
wait,
buses onto the road and that'll be it. Like it's also
that
looking at as well the way people negotiate through their
wait.
lives in the city. If
I'm not talking
sorry.
about metros here. Like I've never mentioned the metros. I'm just completely narrowing in on the bus issue.
But okay, but to an extent, can you see that it's not walking exists actually?
Hmm? Well, how many bikes per capita do you think there are?
Sorry,
But do
not
you think
enough. If you invest in like proper infrastructure of a city like Mamdani wants to, you could absolutely make cycling a more amenable thing as well.
well, I mean, I already think it's very accessible now. So I think buses are a
I mean,
non-issue.
yeah, not for
So
everyone though.
if it's the case that you can raise money by taxing the rich, right? Through corporations so I'm guessing like through corporate tax and higher income taxes.
Yeah, like
Yeah, right.
people who have millions and billions and such have to
Right.
pay
So
more.
you could tax these people, and I disagree that you can do that, but like say you could, right? And you could raise funds. We'll get onto the corporate tax later. um, Even if you could do that, why would you want to spend money poorly? Why wouldn't you just want to put it
How
into
is it
things that are
spending money? Like, okay,
wait. So do you
this
the
family who previously could not actually access a lot of their city because there's no way to get from A to B. I mean, you say walking, Axel, but like New York's quite big. You can't really walk from one side to the other.
wait? No,
Now
New
you can
York.
take a
You can
bus.
totally walk New York City. I've
You can walk New York City.
Yes, you can.
It's massive. What?
Well, I mean, how far you mean like across the entire city?
Well,
Why would
just
you?
getting from A to B. It's okay. It's a cold
Where's
November
A to
day.
B?
It's freezing cold. You got all your groceries and stuff with you. Maybe you're taking your kids somewhere. Maybe you haven't got the best health, and
It's a ten
maybe
minute
it's a bit
walk.
tricky.
Like
Sorry.
10. Yeah, okay, we can go into grocery stores. That's a bit on grocery stores, but there's like it's a 10-minute walk average for like every actual grocery store. And that's like the first
What if you work in a different neighborhood to where you live?
what?
What if you
If you work
work in a different area to where you live?
you just walk there or you
You can't
cycle.
just okay. What if it's okay? What
You
if you
take the
can't walk there?
metro.
What if it's further away?
You can take the
Yeah,
bus, but
you can
you
take a
do realize
metro,
that
but
if you induce demand, you're going to increase waiting times by increasing demand and also increase
okay,
crowding.
but you can't go like okay. Yeah, I like trains as well. I think metropolitan systems are awesome, but the tube stops aren't necessarily as close as a bus stop to where you might be going. So that's why buses exist as well.
What?
Now, if you
No,
can't
there are way more bus stops than like metro stations.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, look, you just said you could take the train. I'm saying that you can't. Like the
No, no, I said
train.
you could take the bus because it's a low fare.
Yeah, and you make it lower, but making it free. Make it
No,
even more
because if you make it
accessible.
free, the waiting times are going to increase and people are going to be more late for
Why
work.
they're gonna have more buses? They're
Induced
gonna have
demand. No,
more
it's
the
induced demand.
services.
This is the same argument as people who
Why
say
do you keep saying induced demand? They're gonna have more
increasing
services.
highways. You increase highway lanes, you increase demand, therefore you increase congestion. This is like empirically proven by
You
every
don't have
paper I've
to.
read.
Like, no, no,
Nolan,
like you don't have to. You don't
come
have to
on, this is like
increase the
so
number of
empirically
lanes.
proven. I'm like, okay, what are you gonna say? Sorry.
Like, you're not just like throwing more buses onto the same road. You're also improving other infrastructure as well to make the fact more people can access it mediated more. You're putting on green policies to make the
Okay,
cars be reduced. Because
you
even
can
if
do
you're
that.
saying there's not as many cars in New York,
So
which again I will
you,
not agree with,
to
there's
be
plenty of
clear,
areas. Sorry.
to be clear, just the buses in of itself are bad policy, right? But you're saying you can improve it through infrastructure, but not bus
It's
policy.
not. No, that's not what I'm saying. Well, I'm saying that you can improve it with the whole infrastructure improvements, but making the buses accessible for everyone is good. Like under. So what you're saying is we should just let some people not have any access to public transport because it may cause congestion.
No, it will cause congestion. It's empirically shown to cause congestion.
It's not empirically
It
shown.
is. I gave you like 4 papers.
I can't even
Um,
read them because it's on a
you,
table.
you can you
But
can read just the abstract. You can read the abstract.
but
But the
even
point.
even these studies aren't saying what you are claiming here
No, it is. It's the
because
principle of induced demand. Do you
it's
agree that
not
these
because
people?
you're not right.
Do
If
you
you
agree?
increase like the buses, they're not. It's not as though there's like a billion going down the road all at once, right? Like if you have a regular service that runs more regularly for more people, like it's not. Yeah, sure. There's going to be maybe some increase in time to some extent because you've got more people using it, but that's mediated by the other positive effects that this would have. You'd have more services, so be
Wait,
able
you're
to get
just.
from A to B more frequently, quicker
This
than
is
walking. Axel, by the way, in the chat,
this is
you'd
just a
have.
deduction, though. There's no empirical evidence to support this.
I mean, there's no empirical evidence.
Which
How is there no?
when did they do it? They did it in Stockholm and it failed. They did it in. Hold on, let me pull my
How
whole
is it?
actual studies.
It's not right. So free buses failed in Stockholm.
Yeah, hold on. No, no, not
How,
free buses. I'm talking about congestion pricing. So the National Center of Sustainable Transportation published a report outlining key research findings supporting the notion that increased capacity does not reduce congestion. And here's the paper from OSED that I can link you, and then I can also link you the report from
right, let's have a look at this quickly. Can we just say as well, by the way,
from
that
Dot.
we're even if we accept this claim that
Oh shit,
congestion
let's.
would inevitably get much worse if buses were free, people can access the service they previously priced out of. Those people, for those people, a bit of congestion would not be worse than having no access whatsoever, which is the whole
But you
point.
do realize
Everyone can access.
people who don't actually need to use it would be using it, right? So I can give you
What do
like
you mean people
a
don't actually what?
because when you make things more accessible and free, people use things without actually rationing it properly. So this is why it's a misallocation of resources.
It's not a
So
they've never had it to begin with. Many people have never experienced
yes, they
the
have.
true effects
We
of it.
had a pilot program and it failed. It
No,
lost
okay,
16.5 million.
In New York, there are lots of people who cannot regularly use public transport because it's too expensive. They're in a cost of living crisis. Those people would benefit from having free buses, no matter how long they're waiting in traffic. That is what we're saying. That's what Mamdani's been saying. And that's even if we take all the stuff you've said for granted, which we're absolutely not, because it's part of a wider set
Wait,
of
hold
changes.
on. So do you agree that lowering prices increases demand? Like do you know about like neoclassical economic modeling with like supply
I
and
have
demand?
heard the idea that if you lower prices, you will more people will want to use it.
Does that
Yes.
does that follow like logically as well? Because as things lower in price, people have a their willingness to pay is
More
higher than the
people would
price.
probably want to use the more people. Yes, more people would probably want to use the bus if it were free.
Wait, so you just granted the principle of induced demand,
That doesn't contradict what I'm saying though, because
but
the
because
fact that
crowding
more
is
people
the
use it,
it will
along with
exacerbate the
other.
worst issue.
Sorry,
It will exacerbate the worst issue, which is crowding.
that isn't the people can't use it. And even if
What?
like okay, if are you telling me right that having a more regular bus service with more buses per every however many minutes would be worse just because the bus you're sat on has more people on it?
No, I'm saying that there's going to be longer waiting lines because of induced demand.
What longer traffic jams?
Longer traffic jams, longer waiting lines on the bus, more crowding. So for example, I can give you a situation since we're working like off of deductions, I guess. So
So what are the traffic jams that are happening now in New York?
right now, I mean, they don't
Yeah.
have. Do you want me to cite the pilot program or?
No, no, you tell me. What is the congestion in New York?
It's going to be crowding. If you look at the MTA survey data
Of what? What type of vehicles?
of buses, MTA
Just
data is for
buses.
busing. Yep,
Just buses.
MTA is for busing data.
Just buses. What? So is it only buses on the road in New York right now?
No, no, of course not. There's bikes.
So what are the motorbikes?
Sometimes. I
So
mean, well,
okay,
I
so
don't
on a
have. You want?
road
I don't
right
have
now.
data on like specific vehicles if that's what
Okay,
you're asking for.
if you're a drone and you're flying over a road, right?
A
You're
drone?
flying down. Okay, thought experiment. You're a drone. You're flying over a road. There's buses on this road. What other
Yep.
vehicles are on the road?
Um, Bikes, buses, cars. Like,
Cars. Cars. There we go.
but
Cars.
what per capita? How many are there?
How many compared to
It's a very
buses?
non-issue.
Cars are a non-issue.
Yes, because it's very low. It's like less than 0.2 per capita when you get into the inner city, but it's
Lower,
much.
yeah, because there's fewer car owners, but still a good deal of cars.
Wait, so are you anti-car?
So I think the number of cars we should be using in inner city areas should definitely be decreased, yeah, because it's terrible for the environment and it creates a world in which people want access to stuff that
Hey,
is
but you know
in
what's
the
even
life.
worse for the environment? Eating
What?
meat.
I agree. Meat is bad for the environment.
Okay, all right. We won't go into veganism here, but I just wanted to add that. Um, okay, so I mean, I can give you a situation like this. This might help it be more palatable, I guess. So you agree that lowering prices does increase demand, right? Just to
In
be
this
clear.
example, yes, if you make
Whoa, whoa, what?
if the transport is free, then people can access
Wait,
it, and there will be more use for it.
what sector of the economy would this not be true, where lowering of prices increase demand?
You tell me. Go on.
No, I don't think there is one. That's the point. I think this is always going to be held true, unless people are very
I,
irrational. That is right.
well, I think there's a few assumptions about our the
Neoclassical
fact
economics.
that
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree. There are like some really weird assumptions in neoclassical economics, but I think this one definitely like holds true. Like lowering prices does increase demand.
Okay, but what does this have to do with
Okay, so
Mamdani?
well, I do think it's going to increase crowding because it's going to exacerbate issues that busters are already most satisfied with. So like let's take crowding for example, right? So if we like look at our models, you agree that lowering prices does increase demand. So like say someone those who are content with taking a bike across town are more likely to use busing even when someone needs the busing more urgently. So they're basically crowding people out who actually need to use it more. So perhaps an
Well,
old
hang
lady who
on.
doesn't have wait, sorry, can I just go through? So
Yeah, go
like
on.
perhaps an old lady who doesn't like have as many options to travel is thus willing to bid more for a bus ticket in order to travel. Yet in a socialized busing scheme, the young man who rides the bus simply because it's free and benefits him at the margin is crowding out other people who value busing much more. So it's like
Right.
it's a inefficient allocation of resources.
Well, no. Okay, right. So both the young man, and the old lady should be able
Yeah,
to access the free bus service. The fact that the old no, I mean, for one, I would hope that the old lady would be given the seat if in this scenario.
but
But the
you do
fact
you
that the young man could cycle doesn't mean that he shouldn't be able to access a free bus service, and there'd be more buses so that they would potentially be able to be on different services. And regardless of these two, there are people who do not have the choice of a bike or a bus and are stuck, because they don't have the access to the transport, which is what Mamdani is trying to address, which is what this policy is trying to address. It's not just
well,
buses he's trying to improve; it's the
are
whole
you talking about
infrastructure.
the people who are very poor, like who can't afford a bus ticket?
Yeah, but people in a cost of living crisis who cannot regularly take public transport because they are balancing
But how does that?
extremely high rent, food costs going up, cost
But
of just general amenities.
you agree that you're internalizing none of the cost when there's like old young people who benefit at the margins and can use the bus, right? And you do understand that at some level of distribution, someone is paying for this, and it's not going to be the rich people; it's going to be everyone.
It would be the wealthiest who pay for
No,
the service in the sense that they're having their tax rates increase and such.
okay, we
I
can.
should just say we're getting to an hour, 2 hours and 30 minutes into
Yeah,
this.
let's move on
My voice
to
is starting
housing.
to.
Yeah, no, me too.
Excuse me.
This is my second water bottle, but we can move on to housing policy if you want.
What I'm saying though is maybe we'll come to, not that I don't want to continue talking to you. I'm happy to do a part two, but my voice is starting to
Oh, okay.
scratch,
Yeah,
so we
we
may
can.
head to a
Yeah,
temporary
we
finish
can.
line of sorts
Yeah,
soon.
sure.
So yeah, but so say what you were going to say about this, sorry, and we'll do a little bit more, and then we'll perhaps
Yeah,
continue
I
this
mean,
another
so
time.
basically, my main thoughts on Mamdani is that he's not a very good candidate. His housing policy is pretty bad as well. Rent control has been shown to, increase shortages. He's doing a second generation rent control, which isn't as bad, but it's pretty bad. So first generation rent control is going to be like universal, but second generation rent control is going to be more targeted. I still think this is bad. There's a really good was it a hold on. There is a there's a good literature review conducted, which has basically shown that first generation rent control is completely terrible and it like causes a lot of, shortages in housing, causes a lot of homelessness. I'm not convinced about second generation housing as well. He's extending it actually. I can link you the literature review. It's
Do you
from
think that right now, just to jump in, do you think that housing is affordable under the current neoliberal management of
it's
society?
not neoliberal because there's so much regulation. There's zoning laws which basically limit how high you can build a house, and this is mainly because of NIMBYs, which is not in my backyard, which they want to decrease light pollution and all these
Okay,
nonsense green policies.
when rent is left to landlords to set the price of, is that something that people can access right now in society fairly?
No, because of regulations.
Is it regulations? Who's setting the price of the rent?
I mean, basically the government with their housing control prices.
Okay, but who then decides after said regulation?
They compete to bid down the lower prices. I
The
mean, I think that's
landlords.
the whole.
So who sets the price? If I want to
Yeah,
go and rent a flat, who am I
yeah.
paying?
So
Who's setting the
so
price?
so landlords do that,
There we go.
but
That's the people who are
but
responsible,
they
and
do bid
that's who
down the
should be.
price, and that's why it's affordable in
They,
Houston because
but,
they give
but
out
is
more
it
housing
affordable? Can
permits.
people afford to? If
In
you're
Hu-
choosing between,
in Houston, do you know how many housing permits are given in Houston versus New York City?
no idea. You
Can,
tell
can
me.
you like guess? Can you guess the multiplier?
So I'm probably quite high from what you've
Do you
said there.
just guess, just like estimate, any estimate?
Go on 5 times.
I last I checked, it was like more like over 10 times, but I would have to relook at it. I honestly don't have the data on hand, but it's like
Right.
absurd because there's so many zoning laws in New York City. For example,
In
they limit.
Houston, there are
Yep,
in Houston and in New York, prices of living is getting very, very high.
not in
It's not
Houston.
affordable. Houston also, by the way, is still in a neoliberal capitalist market and such, and so along with the cost of
What
living
the is
crisis in
everything?
rent.
Is
Sorry.
everything neoliberal? You just said New York City was neoliberal. That's not
Yeah,
neoliberal.
well, yes, our countries are in the stage of neoliberal capitalism, which is the world
Some
over,
parts.
and it's
We have
felt
to.
differently in different places. But the same logic applies. You're still
Do you
having
think
to have your shelter, your housing on a market. Yeah, you're
no
still having to pay someone to live basically in a
neoliberalism?
place.
Neoliberalism is not when private ownership of the means of production. Do you think China is a neoliberal country?
China has elements that trend towards that, and in those special economic
Exactly.
zones,
So
definitely.
this
But
is the point. This is the point. You need to parse like these places individually. New York City is definitely not neoliberal. Do you think like rent
of
control is
course it
neoliberal
is.
policy? Do you think
Of
rent
course it
control is
is.
neoliberal policy? Do you think universalizing, childcare universalizing, all
No,
these
of
things
course
are
not.
part of
But
neoliberal policy?
of course, hamsters. Of course they aren't. But as part of the like these policies exist within a neoliberal ecosystem and have to react on said marketplaces. Hence, when we have issues with these policies, it can't be just seen as when we have issues with when to go back to worker co-ops. If a worker cooperative has hardship, it can't be viewed isolated from the world that's around it, which has overwhelmingly seen less money, go to public programs, and tax rates decrease across the board for the wealthiest corporations and such. So when we're looking at a place like New York or Houston or wherever, especially in America, we absolutely can look to the fact that landlords can basically operate with their profits in mind over a human right like housing, a human necessity, and do what they like with it. And it's the same for things like schools, like transport, healthcare, all of it. And so this is what, when we're talking about neoliberalism, that the area
Wait, so
Mamdani wants to address. Hello, some random geek, by the way. I've seen
so to be
you.
clear, I don't think minimum wage or like rent control is the reason why rent is low. I think it's, entrepreneurs
Rent
competing with each
low.
other. Why do you think only like less than 1% of people earn minimum wage, and why do people pay over minimum wage? It's because of productivity. This is what I was talking about before with so I think firms pay people based on marginal productivity they add to the firm. Necessarily going to be, oh, the landlord can just charge you whatever they want. They can only charge you what the people's willingness to pay are. And if one landlord offers you to housing for like $7,000 and another landlord offers you housing for $6,000, the optimal thing would to be, buy the 6,000 one instead of the 7,000 one. So they're always competing with each other, which drives down cost. And this is like empirically supported as
But
well,
that's
just
not,
just
no,
by
but no, no,
virtue
no, 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 hold on a second.
just by
Because
virtue of the minimum wage,
that
right?
isn't what happens though, because there's no, like, the people with power aren't the workers choosing between contracts. It's the landlords who all offer high prices to live, or extremely like terrible accommodation that like is cheap because it's got like bare minimum stuff in it, and they get away with it because there's no alternative. You can't choose not to give more than you can't choose
No,
to
I see what you're
opt out.
saying. You're
Yeah,
yeah, you're saying that it's a necessity, right? You can't opt out of housing.
exactly. So
Yeah,
that
but
gives an
that
advantage
doesn't
to the wealthy to be able to
that doesn't
profit from because they know
that
you need it.
that doesn't destroy the fact that firms are competing with each other, that entrepreneurs are competing with each other, landlords are competing with each other
Yeah,
to
but
drive down costs.
it's a false competition, isn't it? Because they all benefit from the same practice. They all are still going to have a sizable amount of income at
So
the
does
end
every
because they.
firm. So does Apple and Samsung. Yet they're still
Yeah, but this
competitors.
is not. But this is a false like, oh, I earned
Is that a false
10 billion
competition?
this year and you only earned 9 billion. Like, well, it's not. They're both still extremely wealthy and everyone else is still much
Wait,
poorer.
but to be
It's
clear,
not
they are
genuine.
competing. They are genuinely competing. They,
Yeah,
they're
but in a
they're
way
they're
that doesn't
cannibalizing each other's
matter.
market share. Market share is zero sum. Like if Apple
It,
gains 60% market share, then it necessarily means the rest. Sorry, am I
it's
talking too
not.
much?
But can you see? It's not really like it's not. It's not like there's any
I don't
consequence, is there?
I don't see it
Like,
at all. There are consequences to making bad market decisions. For example,
but there's
Enron.
not though because they like landlords do shocking things all the time, especially in like the amount of shady, awful developers in places like New York
One of
is astounding. But
one of
there is no real consequence because they're
there
still in a
are.
position to be. Sorry, what are they?
The consequences are they're getting crowded out by other people. The consequences are not
But
actually
they're
turning
not
a
though. So
profit.
many of them
The,
still keep their
it's like
wealth.
eviction notices. They just have people in the tenants who just won't leave. One of my coworkers used to be a landlord and owned like 3 units, and then he got so stressed about it he ended up closing it down and buying a gun shop instead. Like it's a lot of
Okay,
work to be a landlord.
it's more work to have to pay to have your human right privileged right. By the way, Axel, like, a roof over your head is far from a human right. Like,
Yeah, no, I agree with him.
what kind of worldview is this? Eh? How is this even?
Because rights confer liberties, not
God.
obligations onto other people.
I suppose I shouldn't be surprised given the child labour comments earlier, right? But
Dude, we are neoliberalism is amazing.
is it though? Is this like
It's
is this
amazing.
the advertising statement about neoliberalism?
It
Your
is.
shelter
I
is
come
not a
on.
human right.
I've obviously read through a lot of papers. Like this isn't just like some random belief I hold.
Of
Like
course it's not. Of course it's not. But the
right.
consequence of the logics in those papers is people being homeless or not being able to eat because they can't afford any of the stuff they need to survive.
No, the
Um,
logic is like hard reality that in where
it's
you're
not
doing
hard
two.
reality. That's what
It
we're
is
saying.
where you have two terrible trade-offs.
But we don't have to have that trait. Like the guy sat with $1 billion off in the corner is the one we should be focusing on. The guy like
Yeah, but what happens when
has
you do,
put a metal shutter down between homeless, starving people and food is the one we're trying to address.
you see the trillionaire and you're like, oh my god, let me put a one-time capital levy on him. But then he ends up not employing people, and then you have
It's not.
long-term effects.
What? Why do we keep going back to one-time capital? Like the whole
because
point is we're changing the
because
whole
that would be
system.
redistributing wealth. That's what you
But
want,
that
right?
would, and even if we ignore, like, okay, obviously, clearly, I am of a more radical leaning than Mamdani, who is in the system and trying to do things within the system and such, right? Mamdani is advocating for redistributing wealth to an extent, And that's
Yep.
good because now
No, that's
people can
bad.
eat and survive more and access to things in their lives without having to choose between eating and paying rent.
Yeah, that's short. That's short-term growth, though. The redistribution is short-term.
It's
What
short
I care
term
about is long-term
critical.
growth, which raises people out of poverty, as like
Right.
demonstrated by capitalism and like telecoms, electricity. Like every single sector of the economy benefits from capitalist mode of
Okay,
production.
if you starve today, you will die and cannot access any of that stuff later. That's what
But
is being addressed.
but to be clear, that's like a very small portion of the population, and
It's,
uh,
it's quite
we
significant if
we
you think
have
about it,
strong
though.
welfare programs to
They've
mitigate
been
this.
defunded.
Socialist
Hamsters.
programs can't do this. Socialist programs
Hamsters.
cannot do this.
The welfare
Socialist
state
modes
is.
of production. Socialist modes of production cannot raise the funds to actually have a welfare program. All they do is starve. Like
No,
this
that
is
is.
like
You just.
factually
No,
true.
that. Okay.
It's
That's not
true.
true. But
It's
the
true.
social programs in the US have been defunded and the UK and everywhere because of the same
You
profit
cannot say
incentive capitalists. They've been
the welfare
defunded.
program has been gutted in the UK. That cannot be true.
Yes, it has. Objectively, the UK's welfare programs do not give the same as what they used to because of austerity, the active policy of several successive governments for decades.
I actually do think austerity is good. I'm not familiar with the UK austerity, so I can't comment too much on that. But the point is that welfare programs still exist, and we can obviously lower welfare programs as standards of living rise. I don't think
But
welfare is going to be a permanent thing.
it should. Well, no one should have to live, via the reliance on welfare programs. But whilst we have capitalism, we need them because the conditions of capitalism don't produce a world where everyone can survive. But
They do.
the sorry.
I disagree with that.
But without
Capitalism
the
doesn't.
welfare program, millions would not be able to survive.
That's just not
Anyway,
true. We had mutual aid societies before, and I don't think that necessarily the state,
before the
acting
welfare
as a
state,
well.
people conditions were far far worse.
Yeah, but conditions were far, far worse because people were less productive then. That's just like a spurious correlation,
No,
right?
because the wealth was not before the welfare state. In places like New York, poverty was rampant,
Yeah,
even
but
higher than it was. The
obviously,
welfare state came in and
okay. Are
gave
you
these
using
people better conditions.
are you using a modern poverty rate or are you using a modern poverty rate back then? Because
As in, people were not in
poverty
good
is defined
health.
by statisticians in Washington, right? So like it doesn't actually it's not a apples to apples comparison if you're going to be using some different metrics for poverty in the 1940s versus poverty now.
People did not have access to basic human amenities to a worse degree in the 1940s and before and such, Industrial Revolution and all, versus
What's
today. However, today things are getting worse because the welfare state that once was
That's not
much
true.
more able to help people has been much worse. Now we're getting even closer to 3 hours, and whilst we could definitely, we'll definitely have part two.
Yeah.
My voice is starting to go,
Okay. Yeah.
and as I don't want to say spirits because I feel like we have been largely in good spirits and such. But yeah, we're clearly different perspectives of sorts. I do want to interrogate more of these assertions, and I'm sure you do to me as well. But I'll leave it to you, hamsters, to. In fact, we'll have a few questions from the chat quickly, yeah, because I'm sure if Axel wants to ask anything, if anybody else wants to ask anything, if you want to ask anything in the chat very quickly now, you've got a moment or so to do so. Whilst people are asking potential questions, hamsters, do you want to give a sort of part one conclusion of sorts, if you for want of a better phrase?
Yeah, I mean, I think all the empirical evidence points to liberalizing the economy. There's like good papers on Argentina and Brazil with like liberalizing the economy and the effects of letting corporations come in and take over your natural resources and creating jobs. I know that sounds like completely completely absurd to you, but I think there's really good evidence for a capitalist mode of production. The lock-in proviso is something that just naturally arises out of people's willingness to partition goods and services. I think that the incentive structure that capitalism creates is super good for the economy, super good for growth, super good for well-being. And I think growth is super important for raising people out of poverty. We didn't see drops in poverty until capitalism really, industrialized combined with capitalism. So I don't think there's any evidence, or I haven't seen any socialist model that has convinced me that we should switch to a socialist mode of production. And that's kind of just my thoughts on socialism versus capitalism.
Well, we had a question which I'll put in a second, but to answer that, I think consistently through this conversation, we've reached the ugliest points of capitalism. We've come to moments where the unavoidable brutality of the system are addressed, are confronted, and we are met with a neoliberal response of things like this. which are just utterly despicable reflections on the way capitalism operates itself. We don't have a solution because the system that we're given tells us this is how we grow, this is how profit is produced, this is how our system must be in order for the capitalist mode of production to continue. And then through this, every moment that Hamsters has advocated for, these models and these statistics and these papers which he's produced, which all largely, present the neoliberal way and the capitalist way as a good thing. Just not even brush over, advocate for many of the inequalities because of some spurious improvement that comes to society. And part of that, I think, comes from taking the achievements of the past, because as you say, our countries, the UK, US, have seen improvements, but these come from worker movements, from civil rights activists, from people who have fought against the brutality of the capitalist system to maintain a better world. People like Zohran Mamdani, who fight for a better world through the small way they can in their electoral systems. And in the future, because I do believe that one day we'll get through the troubles of today, in the future, when we can access our human rights truly freely felt across the world, we'll think, wow, how could we have ever lived in a time where people couldn't take a bus to the nearest place for free? How can we live in a time where millions starve needlessly?
I think
in capitalism?
I don't think there's much evidence that revolution or like any sort of union work or like any sort of advocating of worker rights has been the reason for rising living standards. But do you want to answer the comments now, I guess?
I would just say,
are you familiar with someone
bring it
asked
up,
about
sorry.
someone are you familiar with the ECP, the economic calculation problem?
Go on, enlighten me.
The economic calculation problem is that without some medium of exchange and prices, you can't make economic calculations. So like the bridge versus steel example, with dynamite you don't know which one to use because you don't have some sort of medium of exchange or any sort of good to determine which allocation of resources is more efficient. In a socialist centrally planned economy, you don't have that either, and that's basically like how do you allocate resources efficiently without disequilibrium is what it's saying.
Democratically, through communication, through qualitative and quantitative analysis of resources. You're not saying, you wouldn't be getting rid of statistics, but whereas today they are dictated by capital, by a few people in charge of everyone deciding what is best, it would be mediated and managed through the democratic organization of workers, and I would also say that the solutions we have today are not solutions because clearly millions are left in terrible situations. This person here, Axel, said earlier that child labour was fine and the better choice. That isn't something which is a solution. That is a sustained problem, and that is what we would be addressing by moving away from capitalism to a socialist system.
To be clear, though, democracy wouldn't solve the economic calculation problem because this is like necessarily tactic information. And when you have votes that are trying to, there's going to be an asymmetry of information between me and the entire body of people. So I can't read everyone's mind and collect it and internalize all of the effects. So that's kind of what the economic calculation problem raises.
You'd have professionals in the relevant,
I mean, so did the Soviet.
Isn't seen today.
So did the Soviet Union. They had a pricing committee. They had a bunch of economists.
A socialist system, Hamsters.
But you can't. The point is you can't democratically or plan things top to bottom or bottom to up.
Well, we don't want a bottom or an up. We want to have an equitable system where people have democratic say, and so you wouldn't have powerful figures at the top being able to dictate and decide whose knowledge is more important in a situation. It would be reached through actual coordinated discussion, which sure would have
worker cooperatives
tensions in some places, but it would be far less damaging than what we're seeing now, where we're trashing our planet for the profits of
China is, to be clear.
China is one capitalist nation joining in the destruction. And they're also doing quite a few green policies too, by the way. So I don't think
The
that it is just fair to blame
6%,
only China.
6% of U.S. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
What, sorry?
I mean, okay. I mean, I guess we've kind of covered everything. We can just resume this next time, I guess, if that's cool.
Well, indeed. Anyway, thank you for everyone for listening. Thank you, Hamsters, for joining me.
Yeah.
We will
Nice
end
talking
this
to you.
stream here, and yeah, take care all. Catch us for part 2 when it comes.
All right. Nice talking to you.